Late afternoon sunlight stretched across the dusty highway leading into Rusted Pine, a small, sleepy town nestled in the vast Nevada desert. The barren landscape seemed endless, with nothing but coarse sand and the occasional tumbleweed rolling by in the breeze. In this out-of-the-way place stood a lone garage with chipped paint and a barely legible sign reading Nevada Auto and Truck Repairs. The man who ran it, John Jack Harper, was as unassuming as his shop's faded facade. Graying at the temples, face weathered by time, he carried himself with an unhurried ease, just another old mechanic content to spend his days tinkering with engines and changing oil. Jack's garage sat on the edge of a neglected gas station that had long been abandoned. A few crooked pumps still stood guard as silent sentinels of another era. Inside the workshop, disassembled carburetors and grease-stained rags occupied nearly every surface, while the smell of motor oil clung stubbornly to the air. Locals who swung by for tune-ups were usually greeted with a warm nod, a modest smile, and the occasional offer of a cold soda from Jack's vintage fridge. Beneath the stained work coveralls, though, were hints of a man who had once lived a much different life. His shoulders, still broad despite the years, hinted at a military build, and his forearms bore faint scars that spoke of past conflicts. Now and then, when certain old songs played on his dusty radio, Jack would pause, eyes distant, as if drifting to another time. Most folks in Rusted Pine assumed he was just a guy who'd done a stint in the service, then settled down in Nevada for a quieter life. Just outside the garage's wide doors, a stray dog named Butch lounged on a tattered rug that Jack had thrown down. The mutt was the mechanic's loyal shadow, often trailing him through the shop or snoozing near the tool bench. As the day wore on, the only sounds were the metallic clang of Jack's wrenches and the occasional bark of Butch at some imagined threat in the distance. It was a peaceful existence, predictable, sometimes lonely, but never unbearable. Every so often, a battered pickup or dusty sedan rolled into Rusted Pine, bringing travelers in search of fuel, directions, or the rare break from the desert monotony. Lately, though, more outsiders had been appearing, groups of men in sleek black SUVs driving slowly down the main drag as though taking inventory of the place. They rarely stopped, but their stares did not go unnoticed by the townspeople, especially Jack. Though he appeared unconcerned on the surface, he couldn't ignore the uneasy questions that nudged the back of his mind. Who were they? What did they want? And why Rusted Pine? Something about their presence felt off, a reminder of storms he had weathered long ago. For years, Jack had cultivated a life of anonymity in this desert hideaway, but the desert had a strange way of refusing to stay quiet when trouble approached. A shift in the wind, a growing tension in the air, it all hinted that something was coming. Though no one else seemed to piece it together, Jack's instincts told him the old days might be catching up, threatening the peaceful retreat he'd built for himself. The following morning, golden rays of sunlight filtered through the corrugated metal roof, where a few tiny holes let in beams of brilliance. Jack was already up, fiddling with a dusty old generator that the previous night's customer had brought in. The clang of metal against metal reverberated through the stillness. Outside, Butch chased small desert lizards scurrying among the debris. A light knock on the service door pulled Jack's attention from his task. Standing there was his friend and occasional helper, Clara Brown, a middle-aged waitress from the local diner who dropped by from time to chat or lend a hand. She carried a tray covered by a checkered cloth, the familiar aroma of fresh coffee and homemade blueberry muffins wafting from beneath. "Figured you could use a little breakfast," she said with a grin, placing the tray on a workbench cluttered with various engine parts. Jack nodded in gratitude, peeling away the cloth to reveal 2 steaming mugs and a few perfectly golden muffins. Clara's eyes swept the garage. "You know, I've lived in Rusted Pine my entire life, and this place never changes. Except for you, Jack." She gave him a playful wink. "You actually keep adding more knickknacks." He chuckled softly, eyes crinkling at the corners. "It's how I keep things interesting," he replied. But inwardly, he was relieved that Clara and most of the town saw only the harmless mechanic he portrayed. As they sipped coffee, the conversation shifted to the recent appearances of unfamiliar vehicles. Clara mentioned that a group of men in dark suits had stopped at the diner the other day, barely speaking a word. They had ordered coffee, but left most of it untouched, tipping generously before heading out. They seemed too polished for a place like this, she noted. Jack feigned mild interest, pressing for more details. Clara could only recall so much. They wore sunglasses, spoke quietly among themselves, and left quickly as if time was more valuable than courtesy. Though she was worried, she tried to shrug it off. Maybe they're real estate developers or something, but they gave me the creeps, she admitted. After Clara left, Jack mulled over her words while inspecting a carburetor. Nevada was no stranger to shady deals, be it land schemes, smuggling routes, or even arms trades. But Rusted Pine was tucked so far off the beaten path that few outsiders bothered with it. Any group with serious interest here had to be up to no good. Jack felt the tension coiling within him, an echo of old instincts that never fully went away. He paced around the garage, occasionally glancing at the sun-scorched horizon through a side window. The desert had a way of amplifying silence, making every unspoken concern weigh heavier. Jack's mind wandered back to his Navy SEAL days, memories he had buried under the desert sands along with his old uniform and gear. He recalled clandestine missions in foreign lands, the taste of salt on his lips during underwater infiltrations, the adrenaline pumping as he breached enemy strongholds under moonlit skies. Here, in the still Nevada heat, that life felt distant, almost unreal. But the presence of these mysterious men stirred up an old readiness. He didn't know who they were or what they wanted, but something told him he should be prepared, just in case Rusted Pine became the target of a storm no one else saw brewing. That afternoon, the town's local radio crackled with news that a notorious cartel had been seen operating in the wider region. Rusted Pine might have been off the mainstream map, but it wasn't immune to the trickle of rumors that seeped in from larger cities. The announcer's voice, tinny and distant, mentioned drug-related incidents near the state line, robberies in small border towns, and an unsettling pattern of violence creeping closer to central Nevada. Jack stood by an ancient radio perched on a rickety shelf near his tool set, listening with narrowed eyes. Any mention of organized crime in these parts was unusual. He switched off the radio with a firm click, his jaw tightening. No matter how well he tried to bury the soldier within, he couldn't ignore certain threats, especially when they felt this close. He spent the next few hours reorganizing the back of the garage, pulling out crates of old equipment he hadn't touched in years. Most of it was harmless. Scrap metal, pipes, and outdated machinery. But tucked beneath a false bottom in one large wooden crate was something else. A weathered footlocker bearing his old service name, J. Harper. He crouched there for a moment, one hand resting on the footlockered lid, memories swirling inside his mind like desert dust devils. He almost opened it, almost let himself slip back into that role. Instead, he stood and slid the crate to a more secure corner of the shop. Not yet, he told himself. For now, caution and observation would suffice. He was no vigilante, and if trouble did come, he wanted to be sure it was real before he took matters into his own hands. Throughout the day, Jack kept a sharper eye on the road leading in and out of Rusted Pine. He noted the vehicles that passed by, counted how many times he saw a suspicious black SUV with tinted windows, and mentally logged their license plates. The locals went about their routines, filling up at the rundown gas pumps that still worked, buying groceries at the single-store marketplace, chatting at the diner. If they felt any sense of impending danger, they didn't show it. Or maybe they were too used to a quiet life to see trouble lurking. Early evening brought a magenta sky, the sun dipping low behind distant hills. Jack was about to close up shop when an unfamiliar sedan rolled up. A tall, wiry man stepped out, wearing jeans and a leather jacket. He approached Jack with a casual swagger, introducing himself as Miguel. He claimed to be on a road trip, needing a quick fix for what he described as a rattling noise in the engine. While Jack examined the car, Miguel wandered around the garage, casually asking questions about the town, who owned which properties, who the local authorities were, and how often people came passing through. The questions, though delivered with a friendly smile, felt intrusive. Jack responded politely but kept his answers vague. After the repairs, Miguel paid in cash, too eagerly, Jack thought, and offered a generous tip. "Might see you around," he said, flashing a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Then he drove off into the desert twilight. Jack watched the taillights fade into the distance, an unease tightening in his gut. If these men were part of a cartel scouting new territory, Rusted pine could become a pawn in their expansion. He let out a slow breath and closed the garage doors, trying to brush off the tension. But deep down, he knew a reckoning might be coming, and the peaceful life he cherished would soon be tested. Nightfall brought a welcome drop in temperature, though the garage remained hot and stuffy. Jack sat on a folding chair outside the shop's entrance, sipping from a cold bottle of water as stars blinked to life overhead. The sound of cicadas filled the air, creating a steady rhythm that usually lulled him into a sort of calm. Not tonight. Tonight, the desert ambiance only made him more aware of how quiet everything was, and how quickly that peace could shatter. He recalled a time, years ago, when he was deployed overseas. His unit would often spend nights in hostile territory, waiting for signals of enemy movement. The tension in the air now felt eerily similar. A distant coyote howl made Butch perk up his ears. Jack absent-mindedly stroked the dog's fur, scanning the horizon. What if those suspicious visitors returned in greater numbers? Who would protect this town that had never known real violence? Unable to shake these thoughts, Jack eventually stood and made his way inside, heading toward his cramped living quarters tucked behind the main workspace. It wasn't much, just a small cot, a wooden dresser, and a kitchenette, but it was home. He rummaged through a drawer until he found a laminated picture. It showed a younger man in navy whites, arm draped around a fellow SEAL brother. A different time, a different life. He stared at it for a long moment before placing it back, face down. Sleep came fitfully, visions of desert raids, the echo of gunfire, and the grim reality of cartel brutality wove through his dreams. By dawn, Jack was awake again, restless. He decided to go for a short run down the back roads leading from his garage. The brisk morning air and steady rhythm of his footsteps helped clear his head. He might be older now, but his body still remembered the discipline hammered into him by years of rigorous training. Upon returning, he found that someone had slipped a small envelope under the garage's main door. Inside was a note, written in a neat but unfamiliar hand. "We like your town. There's opportunity here. Stay out of our way and no one gets hurt." There was no signature, just a symbol, a stylized skull wearing a bandana. The meaning was all too clear, though. A direct threat from people who thought they could scare an old mechanic into submission. Jack's jaw clenched. Cartels typically bullied their way into communities, counting on fear to do most of the work. They'd look for the weakest link, a place where local law enforcement was nearly non-existent, like Rusted Pine. While the local sheriff was a decent enough man, he was ill-equipped to handle organized criminals. The threat might have been delivered to the mechanic's doorstep, but it was aimed at the entire town. He folded the note carefully, setting it aside. He wouldn't run to the sheriff yet, not until he had more to go on. But ignoring it was out of the question. Walking over to the footlocker hidden beneath the crates, Jack rested his hand on it again. Maybe it was time to revisit the skills and tools he'd set aside so long ago. A part of him hated the idea of resorting to violence. He had chosen this quiet life for a reason. But another deeply ingrained part, the soldier, knew that sometimes the only way to deal with a bully was to stand firm and be ready to strike back. The morning sun was high when Clara showed up again, bringing news of an unsettling conversation at the diner. A couple of strangers had come in shortly after sunrise, asking pointed questions about local businesses and the feasibility of mass shipments through the area. They wore flashy suits and sunglasses, exuding a confidence that set everyone on edge. One had a thick, snake-like tattoo on his wrist, a detail Clara remembered vividly. They mentioned they'd heard about a small trucking operation that ran outside of Rusted Pine, as though seeking distribution points. Clara's hands shook slightly as she recounted the interaction to Jack. He offered her a seat on the metal stool by his workbench. "Take a breath," he said gently, passing her a cold bottle of water. "They can't do much harm unless we let them." She gave him a worried look. "You're not just a mechanic, are you?" she asked abruptly, surprising even herself with the question. Though she'd never pressed him for personal details, the undercurrent of confidence he radiated made her suspect there was more to him. Jack hesitated, then gave a half smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I've seen my share of rough patches," he replied, keeping it vague. Clara didn't push further, but Jack could tell she suspected something deeper. The tension in the room was tangible, like the static before a summer storm. As the day wore on, a succession of locals stopped by with small repairs and errands, each of them anxious and curious about the newcomers in town. One older rancher muttered about how these strangers had been seen driving around his property, scoping out the land as if they owned the place. Another neighbor mentioned the suspicious vehicles parked on a secluded dirt road just outside the town. Fear was rippling through Rusted Pine, unspoken yet pervasive. Determined not to let these concerns paralyze him, Jack began a discreet information-gathering operation of his own. He kept a small notebook in his back pocket, jotting down descriptions of vehicles, partial license plates, and times of day the strangers appeared. If he was going to take any meaningful action, he needed to know exactly what he was dealing with. He also began surveying the garage more critically, identifying potential weak points. The roll-up door could be reinforced. The windows could use stronger locks. Even the ancient gas station pumps could be rigged to create a defensive perimeter. Though that was a risky move he'd only consider as a last resort. His training taught him that preparation was half the battle, and he silently vowed not to be caught off guard if the situation escalated. By late afternoon, the heat wave peaked, turning the entire desert landscape into a shimmering mirage. Jack took a moment to step outside and gaze across the quiet expanse. Rusted Pine's few houses stood in the distance, dust swirling around their foundations. In the other direction, the open desert stretched toward the horizon, its secrets hidden behind the heat haze. Butch ambled over, nuzzling Jack's leg before flopping down in the shade. Looking down at Jack felt a pang of responsibility, not just for his loyal companion, but for the townspeople who had come to rely on him in small yet significant ways. It wasn't an obligation he'd asked for, but if danger was indeed on their doorstep, he couldn't turn away. This was his home now, and he'd do everything in his power to protect it. Old ghosts from the past be damned. As dusk approached, the garage was empty except for the warm glow of a single overhead lamp. Jack locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed. The day's tension still clung to him, refusing to dissolve. He tossed his dirty work gloves onto a bench and grabbed a rag to wipe the sweat from his brow. Outside, the sky was a canvas of deep orange and purple, the last of the sun's rays vanishing behind distant mountains. A soft knock at the side door startled him. His instincts kicked in before he could think. A wave of adrenaline surged as he pivoted, careful steps carrying him toward the door. He slowly turned the knob, ready for anything. But it was Sheriff Duncan, hat in hand, a solemn look on his face. "Mind if I come in?" the sheriff asked, voice strained. Jack nodded, opening the door wide enough for the lawman to step through. Duncan removed his hat and ran a hand through thinning hair. He looked around the garage as though searching for something, then sighed. "Jack," he began, "I got word from a buddy in the state police. They're tracking unusual movements by a small cartel faction. Rumor has it they've been branching out into rural areas, looking for new smuggling routes. Some of their boys have been spotted around these parts." Jack leaned against his workbench, arms folded. "I've seen them," he confirmed. "They've been snooping around, asking questions. Left a threatening note, too." Duncan's face fell. "I was afraid of that. We're not equipped for a serious cartel presence. Our department is 4 men strong, including me, and we handle things like trespassing or the occasional bar fight, not organized crime." Jack nodded in grim understanding. "You're thinking of calling in more help?" "I am," Duncan said, "but I'm not sure how fast that help will arrive. We're off the main routes. State officials might not prioritize us if they think it's just rumors. Plus, these cartels know how to move quietly until they're entrenched." A silent moment passed as both men contemplated the fragility of Rusted Pine. Sheriff Duncan finally spoke again, his voice low. "Jack, I know you used to serve. People talk. They say you were in the Navy, maybe more than that. If there's anything you can do, legally, of course, I'd appreciate it. But if you're just a mechanic, I understand." Jack hesitated, wrestling with the part of him that longed to remain anonymous. But the stakes had risen. "I was special operation," he admitted quietly. "I'm not looking for trouble, but I won't stand by if they bring it to us." Relief flickered in Duncan's eyes, though he hid it well. I'm not deputizing you or anything like that, he said carefully. But your expertise might be exactly what this town needs right now. Just be careful. These aren't common thugs. With that, he tipped his hat and made for the door, leaving Jack alone in the hush of the workshop. The old mechanic exhaled, letting the tension settle. It was one thing to suspect violence was on the horizon. It was another to have the sheriff confirm it. Jack switched off the overhead lamp and stood in the darkness for a moment, letting his eyes adjust. He reached into a drawer, pulled out a small flashlight, and then walked to the back corner. The footlocker was still there, silent and unassuming, containing pieces of a life he'd tried to bury. With each passing day, it seemed more certain that he'd have to open it and become, at least briefly, the man he once was. He placed a hand on the cool metal surface. Tomorrow, he decided. One more sunrise of peace before he took the plunge back into a world of tactical thinking and potential violence. The desert night was quiet now, but an invisible drumbeat was beginning, a herald of the confrontation Rusted Pine never imagined it would face. Night gave way to the stark, golden morning light of the Nevada desert. Jack woke early, the day's looming uncertainties gnawing at the edges of his mind. Determined to ready himself, he finally dragged out the footlocker from its concealed spot. Gently he lifted the lid, revealing the relics of his old identity. A few medals, faded photographs, a military knife still in its sheath, and a meticulously wrapped sidearm he hadn't touched in ages. He unwrapped the weapon. It was a standard-issue pistol, reliable if well-maintained. With deliberate care, he disassembled and cleaned it, muscle memory guiding each step. He changed the worn-out springs, checked the firing pin, and oiled every moving part until it gleamed. Next came the magazines, tested and loaded with fresh rounds. The motions were soothing in a strange way, as though returning to a long-lost routine. In the silence of the garage, Butch watched him from a corner, tail wagging slowly but cautiously, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. Along with the sidearm, Jack inspected a set of night vision goggles. One lens was cracked, probably from rattling around during one too many moves, but they might still be salvageable. He set the goggles aside, deciding to see if any local supply store or surplus shop might carry a replacement lens. In a small pouch, he found a few leftover flashbangs, carefully stored with layers of protective material. He had to grin at how out of place such gear was in a humble garage. Once he'd organized everything, he stashed the items away again, though this time not in the far corner. If the cartel moved quickly, he needed to be ready. The sense of weight, both literal and metaphorical, settled over him. He had hoped to never again need these tools, but the world had a cruel way of drawing a man back into old habits. Clara arrived around mid-morning, pushing the door open with her hip while balancing a bag of groceries in her arms. She nearly dropped them when she spotted the open footlocker. A flicker of alarm crossed her face, followed by a cautious understanding. "You really were more than just a mechanic," she murmured. Setting the bag down on a nearby crate, Jack gave a rueful nod. "I didn't want to worry anybody," he said, "but if the sheriff's right and this cartel is moving in, I won't just stand by." Clara stepped closer, eyes darting over the half-revealed items. She didn't recoil or question him about his past. Instead, she lowered her voice. "Let me help," she said. "I don't know much about fighting, but I can keep an ear out for any gossip at the diner. People talk, especially when they're scared." Her offer was genuine, a testament to her loyalty and the strong bond that had formed between them over the years. Jack nodded in appreciation. "Information is what we need most right now. If you hear anything, anything at all, bring it to me or the sheriff immediately. And be careful who you talk to." Clara agreed, her determination palpable. Before leaving, she glanced at the bag she'd brought, which contained sandwich fixings and a fresh loaf of bread. "At least eat something decent today, okay?" she said, her voice softer. Jack managed a small smile. As she left, Jack locked the door behind her, returning to his footlocker one more time. The air felt thick with anticipation, a silent drumbeat heralding conflict. He didn't like the idea of resorting to violence, but if the cartel forced his hand, he'd respond. The desert sun climbed higher, the day's heat intensifying, mirroring the tense atmosphere enveloping Rusted Pine. And the old mechanic could feel it in his bones. This was only the beginning. By mid-afternoon, Rusted Pine's main street was quieter than usual. Locals who might have been outside, watering their lawns or chatting on porches, had retreated indoors. The air itself seemed uneasy. Even the wind had died, leaving the desert unnervingly still. Jack, determined to get a better handle on the situation, set off in his battered pickup to check on a few neighbors who lived on the outskirts of town. His first stop was the ranch of Earl and Marlene Thompson, an elderly couple who'd lived in Rusted Pine since it was nothing but a patch of dirt and a few rundown buildings. Earl was out front, leaning on a weathered fence post, shotgun resting within arm's reach. "Heard you might know something about all these fancy cars passing by," Earl greeted, skipping any pleasantries. Jack sighed, stuffing his hands into his pockets. "I know enough to be concerned." He lowered his voice, glancing around. "You seen anything else unusual?" Earl nodded. "Just last night, I caught headlights creeping around our property line. By the time I got out there, they were gone, but I found fresh tire tracks. Seemed like they were scoping out the place." Marlene appeared at the screen door, her gaze filled with worry. She offered Jack a small wave but remained silent. It was no secret that the Thompsons had only each other. Any threat to their ranch was a threat to their livelihood and safety. Jack promised to keep an eye out and suggested they stay vigilant. Lock doors, keep the shotgun close. His next stop was an abandoned gas station off a dirt road. The structure, long since boarded up, made the perfect hideout or vantage point for anyone wanting to spy on the comings and goings of Rusted Pine without being noticed. Jack parked some distance away and hiked carefully through the scrub brush, mindful to keep a low profile. He found signs that the place had been used recently: discarded cigarette butts, empty water bottles, fresh footprints in the dust. One particular set of prints looked like it belonged to heavy boots, possibly men used to trekking rough terrain. Trying to glean more information, Jack snapped photos with a small digital camera he kept in his glove box for documenting repairs, though now it served a different purpose. The brand on the bottles was unfamiliar, some label in Spanish he didn't recognize. Likely from across the border, he thought grimly. Climbing a small hill nearby, he used a pair of binoculars to survey the horizon. Rusted Pine lay below like a scene from an old western, a few streets branching off from the main drag, a diner, a bar, and his own garage. No immediate signs of danger, but his instincts screamed that the eyes on the town were growing in number. As the afternoon wore on, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the desert floor. Jack made his way back to his pickup, planning to return to the garage before dark. On the drive, his thoughts churned. Even if the locals banded together, the cartel had manpower, weaponry, and a ruthless reputation. A direct confrontation might be suicidal without careful planning. Yet he couldn't ignore a fundamental truth. Cartels thrived on fear and the element of surprise. Jack had once been part of a team that specialized in turning the tables, using ingenuity and skill to outmaneuver larger forces. Could he do it again, alone or with minimal help? He had to at least try. If there was any chance of preserving the town's peace without a bloodbath, Jack would pursue it. But in the back of his mind, he knew such hope often clashed with reality. The sky was aflame with orange and red hues by the time Jack returned to his garage. After parking the pickup, he walked around to check the perimeter, ensuring no windows were tampered with, no locks were jimmied. An unsettling calm hung in the air, as though the desert was holding its breath. Inside, he found an envelope slipped under the door, much like before. He braced himself for another ominous note. This time it contained a single photograph, a grainy snapshot of the diner, specifically showing Clara inside serving a customer. A short message was scrawled on the back. "Mind your business. We don't need to hurt anyone yet." Jack's stomach lurched. The note targeted someone he cared about, and it was a brutal reminder that the cartel was watching his every move. He clenched his fists, anger roiling beneath his calm exterior. How dare they threaten Clara? He bit back the urge to storm into the desert in search of these men, knowing impulsive action would only backfire. He set the photo on his workbench and tried to think logically. Every threat, every sign of surveillance, was part of a psychological game. If they could intimidate him, and by extension, the town, into submission, they'd gain control without firing a shot. That couldn't be allowed. Determined to protect Clara, he locked away the photo and reached for a burner phone he'd kept for emergencies. Years ago, he'd severed ties with most of his military acquaintances, preferring the quiet life. But there was one old friend he knew he could trust. Garrett Hawk Hawthorne, a fellow SEAL who'd settled in Arizona to run a private security firm. If anyone had the resources or connections to help Rusted Pine, it was Hawk. Jack pressed a few keys, his heart thumping as the line rang. It took a few moments before a gruff voice answered. Hawthorne here? It's Harper, Jack said simply. A pause, then a warmth entered the other man's tone. Well, I'll be damned. Been a long time, Jack. Everything okay? Jack inhaled deeply, glancing at the photo again. Not exactly. I'm dealing with a cartel sniffing around my town. They've started making threats, doing recon. The locals aren't equipped for this. I could use a hand, discreet if possible. Hawk's voice lowered, serious. Cartels are no small matter, especially if they're branching out. You calling in a favor? Yeah, Jack admitted. I need some intel at the very least. Do you have contacts in the region who can gather info on these guys, identify their leadership, resources, that kind of thing? Hawk promised to pull some strings and get back to him as soon as possible. After a quick exchange of details, Jack ended the call, relief mingling with apprehension. Help might be on the way, but it would take time. Time that Rusted Pine may not have in abundance. He moved through the garage, taking stock of potential vulnerabilities. He took mental notes on how to fortify the building if it came to that, reinforcing windows with metal bars, adding a few hidden vantage points on the roof, possibly setting up a perimeter alarm. Each idea rekindled a piece of his old SEAL mindset, that methodical approach to planning for the worst. But these were defensive steps. Cartels didn't just knock on the door, they kicked it in. He couldn't just turtle up and hope they'd leave. He needed to stay one step ahead. Jack found himself checking his watch repeatedly, waiting for Hawk's callback like a man awaiting a crucial supply drop in hostile territory. Outside, the desert night grew darker, the stars bright and cold. Jack locked the doors, turned off the lights, and settled in for another restless night, haunted by the photograph's threat. Sleep came, but only in fragments. In his dreams, the line between past and present blurred, culminating in the unsettling realization that he might soon have to embrace the warrior he once was. This time, not on foreign soil, but in the very place he called home. Dawn arrived with a gentle glow, illuminating the garage's exterior. Jack was already awake, seated at a makeshift desk he'd cobbled together from plywood and old car parts. Empty coffee cups surrounded him as he pored over a crude map of Rusted Pine, marking possible cartel entry points and vantage spots. The phone lay nearby, silent since his call to Hawk. A sudden rap on the side window jolted him. Sheriff Duncan's face appeared, wearing a grim expression. Jack opened the door to let him in. The sheriff stepped inside, adjusting the brim of his hat before speaking. I got a report early this morning, Duncan said quietly. Earl Thompson's fence was cut, and some of his cattle got loose. It's more than just vandalism. Looks like intimidation. They left a message painted on his barn, something in Spanish about paying dues or getting out. Earl's wife is scared stiff. Jack nodded, unsurprised. The cartel was escalating their harassment techniques, pushing the town to a boiling point. They're making examples, he muttered, running a hand across his stubbly chin. Have you called for backup yet? Duncan sighed, dropping into a chair. I have, but it could be days before any state or federal support arrives, if they even come. We're small potatoes on their radar. Jack showed the sheriff the threatening photo he received of Clara. Duncan's eyes darkened. They're going after folks who matter to you, hoping to break your resolve, he said. These guys don't want to fight if they can help it. They'd rather take control through fear. That settled it for Jack. If the cartel thought intimidation would keep him at bay, they were gravely mistaken. I'm in touch with an old contact, he revealed. He's gathering intel, might be able to give us an edge. Until then, we need to quietly fortify. Spread the word that folks should stay alert, but don't panic. The sheriff agreed. I'll do some rounds, talk to the handful of people who might be willing to put up a fight if needed. Keep it hush-hush. Better to be prepared than caught with our pants down. Jack said. Duncan nodded and left. Alone again, Jack stared at the map. There was a small canyon northwest of Rusted Pine that led to an abandoned railroad track, a route the cartel could potentially use to smuggle goods in and out without attracting much attention. If they set up shop near that canyon, the threat to the town would be far from over. He decided to do some reconnaissance. Donning worn hiking boots and a sun-bleached hat, he packed a small bag with water, binoculars, and a first aid kit. He also slipped his cleaned and loaded sidearm into a concealed holster at his waist. It felt both foreign and strangely comforting, a reminder that the old soldier in him was still very much alive. Stepping into the unrelenting sunlight, Jack navigated his truck through back roads, eventually reaching a narrow dirt path that wound toward the canyon. The day was blisteringly hot, the kind of heat that shimmered off rocks and waves. But he pressed on, parking at a hidden spot and continuing on foot. The high desert shrubs and the rocky terrain made for slow, careful progress. Every crunch of gravel under his boots seemed too loud in the eerie silence. Reaching a vantage point overlooking the canyon, Jack lifted his binoculars. He scanned the dry expanse below. At first, nothing. Then, movement. Two men standing by a cluster of bushes, an SUV partially hidden behind them. Through the magnified view, he glimpsed firearms, and from their posture, they were guarding something, or someone. Jack's pulse quickened. This had all the hallmarks of a staging area. The cartel was closer than he'd feared, setting up right at the town's doorstep. He lowered the binoculars slowly, the weight of the discovery hitting him full force. Rusted Pine was in more danger than ever, and the window for a peaceful resolution was closing fast. After taking note of the men's movements and snapping a few discreet photos, Jack crept back to his truck. He kept an ear tuned to the rustle of shrubs and the crunch of gravel, wary of patrols. By the time he reached the driver's seat, his mind was churning with questions. How many men did the cartel have here? What was their timeline? Had they already bribed someone in town for information? He started the engine and drove away, careful not to kick up too much dust. The drive back felt endless, each mile weighed down by the knowledge of how precarious the situation had become. Upon arriving at the garage, he discovered a missed call on the burner phone from an unknown number. His heart thudded. Likely Hawk. With trembling hands, he dialed back. "Harper," came Hawk's recognizable voice. "Got some intel for you. The group you're dealing with calls itself Los Escorpiones. They're a splinter faction from a larger cartel trying to carve out their own territory. They're known for being more mobile and aggressive than most." Jack rubbed his brow, absorbing the news. "Any idea who leads them or what they want with a place like Rusted Pine?" "It's run by a mid-level boss named Hector Zamora," Hawk explained. "He's trying to establish new smuggling routes, especially for arms and narcotics. Rural areas off main highways are prime targets because they're less patrolled and easy to intimidate." "Highways are prime targets because they're less patrolled and easy to intimidate. I've seen some of his men near an old canyon route," Jack replied. "They're probably using that as a foothold." "Sounds right," Hawk agreed. "Zamora has a reputation for swift, brutal takeovers. Locals who resist usually regret it, but if you can show strength early, you might force him to reconsider. Cartels hate drawn-out conflicts that cost money and lives." Jack glanced at the threatening photo pinned by a magnet on an old filing cabinet. "I'm not letting them walk over this town," he said quietly. "I appreciate the intel, Hawk." "Anytime. And Jack, be careful. Let me know if you need more direct assistance. I've got a couple of guys who owe me favors." They ended the call, and Jack felt a renewed sense of urgency. Hector Zamora wasn't just a random thug. He was methodical, dangerous. The presence of armed men near the canyon confirmed that Los Escorpiones was already staging. He spent the next few hours planning. Pulling out a notebook, he jotted down possible strategies, ways to disrupt the cartel's supply lines, confuse their scouts, and protect the townspeople. Memories of covert missions flooded back, setting ambushes, using terrain to an advantage, employing minimal manpower to achieve maximal results. This time, though, the battlefield was his home turf, and the civilians weren't distant villagers but friends and neighbors he saw every day. The tension in his neck grew with each scribble of his pen. He paused only to let Butch out for a quick run around the block, giving the dog a reassuring pat before locking up once more. Eventually, Sheriff Duncan arrived to check in. Jack briefed him on the canyon discovery, the number of men spotted, and Hawk's intel. Duncan's face grew increasingly grave. "This is bigger than I expected," the sheriff admitted. "Our best bet might be to scare them off before they fully dig in. If Zamora thinks it's not worth the trouble, he might retreat." Jack nodded. "Agreed, but we have to act quickly and carefully." Duncan left with a promise to return in the morning, after quietly recruiting a few trusted townspeople who could handle firearms. As evening fell, the sky turned an ominous shade of purple. Jack closed the garage doors, methodically double-checking every lock, every window. The day had delivered crucial information, but also the stark realization that a confrontation was inevitable. With Hector Zamora's men practically camped at their doorstep, Rusted Pine's clock was ticking. Outside, the desert winds began to pick up, rattling loose metal sheets and sending small spirals of dust dancing along the road. Jack shut off the overhead lights, leaving just a small lamp glowing near his desk. He paced the garage, restless. The strategy he was piecing together in his notebook still felt incomplete, missing that element of unpredictability so essential in asymmetric warfare. Clara dropped by after her shift, looking drained but resolute. She hadn't been directly threatened again, but tension at the diner was high. "People sense something bad's coming," she said. "The men in suits haven't shown up lately, but everyone's on edge." Jack handed her a bottle of water. "Thanks for coming by. Any new talk?" Clara sat on a stool, brushing dust from her skirt. "A couple of travelers mentioned seeing men with rifles in a black SUV headed out of town. Everyone's scared. The diner's practically empty after sundown." Jack considered her words. "They might be testing us, showing up in broad daylight to gauge the response." Her eyes flicked to the map spread out on his makeshift desk. "You really think they'll come here first?" He shrugged. "Could be. They've threatened me in the garage. They see me as a potential obstacle or a rallying point for the town. Taking me out would send a message." She frowned, a mix of concern and defiance in her eyes. "I won't let them hurt you, Jack." A small smile tugged at his lips, but he shook his head. "I appreciate it, but I need you safe. If push comes to shove, get out of here. Promise me." She hesitated, then nodded, though her expression made it clear she didn't like the idea of running. Before leaving, Clara pressed a small slip of paper into his hand, her home phone along with the neighbor's line, in case of an emergency. "Call if you need anything," she said softly, stepping out into the windy night. Alone once more, Jack stared at the slip of paper. He wanted nothing more than to protect Clara and the rest of the town, even if it meant drawing on his old skills. But he also knew how easily violence could spiral out of control. One misstep, and innocent people could get caught in the crossfire. He settled down to refine his plan. On a fresh page he wrote, "Disrupt cartel communications. Identify their likely channels, cell signals, radio frequencies, and jam or intercept if possible. Secure locals. Encourage families to consolidate in safer locations. If the church basement or the old schoolhouse could be fortified, that might give them shelter. Ambush points. Use the desert's natural choke points, like the canyon pass, to funnel cartel vehicles. Small explosives or improvised traps might slow them down. Gather allies, the sheriff's men, plus any able-bodied locals who can handle firearms. Possibly get Hawk's help if time allows." He ran his finger along the lines, mentally assigning tasks. Time was short, but a well-executed plan could tip the balance. Hours passed in solitude, the wind outside eventually dying to a low moan. A single overhead bulb cast shifting shadows on the oil-stained concrete floor. Around midnight, the phone buzzed again. Another text from Hawk. "Zamora rumored to send more men soon. Be ready." That simple message jolted Jack's heart. More men meant increased firepower, deeper entrenchment. If Rusted Pine had any chance of shaking them off without a bloodbath, they needed to act soon. He clicked off the text and rubbed his eyes, exhaustion pulling at him. Tomorrow would bring the next step, a step from which there might be no turning back. With the lamp still burning, Jack finally lay down on a small cot in the back room. Sleep took hold in fits and starts. dreams fractured by flashes of desert gunfights and the harsh memory of battles fought a lifetime ago. Outside, the Nevada sky shimmered with countless stars, indifferent to the human struggle unfolding beneath them. The next morning arrived with an uneasy hush over Rusted Pine. Jack woke to the sharp ring of his phone. Sheriff Duncan was calling. While the line crackled, Jack could hear urgency in the lawman's voice. A couple of ranchers on the town's northern edge had spotted unfamiliar vehicles prowling near a dry creek bed. It seemed the cartel was testing the outskirts, gauging how quickly the locals would respond. Jack agreed to meet the sheriff in 15 minutes at the diner. He threw on a fresh shirt, tugged on his boots, and patted Butch on the head. The dog whined, sensing his owner's tension. "Stay here, boy," Jack said quietly, double-checking that the garage was locked up tight before heading out. The morning air still held a chill, a fleeting reprieve before the desert sun turned everything scorching hot. When Jack pulled into the diner's parking lot, Sheriff Duncan stood out front, leaning against his cruiser. Clara peeked through the diner's window, her expression equal parts worry and curiosity. Two other men, Cole and Travis, locals who had some hunting experience, were also present. Their faces looked grim. "Glad you could make it, Jack," Duncan said, tipping his hat. "We need a quick powwow." Jack greeted the others, noting their tense postures. "Heard about the vehicles near the creek bed." Cole, a lanky man in his late 20s, nodded. "They took off soon as they spotted me and my dad on our horses. Drove too fast for us to get a good look at the plates, but definitely wasn't local." Travis, older and built like an ox, added, "Used to see that kind of tactic in the service. Quick infiltration recon, testing how folks react." Duncan nodded, confirming their suspicions. "We've got a handful of men who can handle firearms, but we're outmatched if this turns into a full-scale confrontation. Folks are scared, but some are willing to fight." Jack glanced around, lowering his voice. "We need to maintain the element of surprise. If the cartel thinks we're an easy target, they'll commit more forces. But if they sense we're prepared, they might slow down or back off. We must strike a balance." Clara walked out from the diner, holding a tray of coffee cups. "You all look like you could use this," she said softly, passing them around. There was a quiet gratitude in the men's eyes. Coffee was a small comfort, but any warmth was welcome on a morning as tense as this. "Thanks," Jack murmured, taking a cup. "Any new chatter in the diner?" She shrugged. "Just folks worried about break-ins and missing cattle, the usual hush-hush rumors, but nothing concrete." Duncan cleared his throat. "Here's the plan for now. Travis and Cole will ride patrols near the northern edge. I'll check the southern boundary. Jack, you coordinate with them and see how we can set up some basic defenses. We're not looking to start a war, just let these guys know we're not pushovers." With a final nod, everyone dispersed. Jack placed a reassuring hand on Clara's shoulder before heading back to his truck. She looked up at him, concern etched into her face. "Be careful, Jack." "I will," he promised, though even he wasn't entirely sure what careful looked like when you were standing against a well-armed faction like Los Escorpiones. His mind was already whirring with tactical considerations. Sight lines, vantage points, fallback positions. The time for half measures was over. If Rusted Pine and wanted a fighting chance, they had to prepare for the worst, and that preparation would start now. Jack spent the afternoon driving around the perimeter of town with Cole and Travis, identifying potential weak spots. The wind kicked up dust devils that danced across the two-lane road, and the heat waves shimmered off the asphalt like ghosts. They discussed vantage points for lookouts, a water tower on the east side, a rocky outcrop overlooking the canyon, and the elevated railroad tracks that cut through the desert. Cole pointed to a patch of tall brush near the creek bed. "If I were them," he mused, "I'd hide a vehicle or two right there. Hard to spot from the road, and it's got a direct line of sight to the main highway." Travis nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "Makes sense. They could watch all traffic coming in or out without being noticed. We might place a lookout up on that ridge, keep watch with binoculars." Jack mentally mapped everything, recalling his old recon training. A couple of game cameras set up in strategic spots could help us track any movement at night, especially if we go dark. These guys will do most of their infiltration under cover of darkness. "Game cameras?" Cole asked, sounding intrigued. "You can find them at hunting stores," Jack explained. They run on batteries and don't make much noise, so the cartel won't notice them. We'll just have to collect the memory cards regularly. They drove on, stopping here and there to snap photos and jot down notes. Jack felt a distant echo of his SEAL days. Only this time, the stakes were painfully personal. The possibility of gunfire erupting near the quiet homes of Rusted Pine weighed on his mind. When they returned to the center of town, they found Sheriff Duncan waiting outside the police station, a small cinder block building that looked more like a forgotten storage unit than a hub of law enforcement. He had an old topographical map spread across the hood of his cruiser. Beside him stood a new face, a younger deputy named Alvarez, fresh-faced and jittery. Duncan beckoned them over. Word is the cartel might be scouting along the old railroad tracks. Alvarez here spotted an SUV parked near a collapsed tunnel. It sped off when he approached. Could be they're storing equipment out there, Jack said, scanning the map, or testing infiltration routes. The sheriff tapped the map at a spot marked Tunnel 3, an abandoned section that used to carry freight decades ago. If they stash weapons or goods there, we need to know. Alvarez can't handle that alone. Jack nodded. I'll check it out tomorrow at first light, maybe with Travis. Cole can help me acquire some game cameras. We'll set them up around key points. Everyone agreed, a somber sense of duty hanging in the scorching air. Jack rolled up the map and handed it back to Duncan. We've got to be subtle, though, he added. If we spook them too soon, they'll retaliate hard. Duncan's jaw tightened. We're out of our depth, but we'll do what we must to protect this town. Late in the day, Jack finally returned to his garage. He collapsed into an old wooden chair, mentally exhausted. The magnitude of the task at hand was sinking in. A handful of locals, a tiny sheriff's department, and an ex-SEAL with limited resources, all pitted against a ruthless cartel bent on expanding its territory. He glanced at the footlocker in the corner, the one containing relics of a past life. If things escalated any further, there'd be no choice but to open it again. With a weary sigh, Jack locked the garage door. Outside, dusk settled over Rusted Pine, painting the sky in deep purples and oranges, a fleeting beauty overshadowed by the specter of conflict lurking just beyond the desert horizon. Sunrise painted the desert sky in lavender and gold. Jack stood outside his garage, sipping black coffee from a chipped mug, trying to muster energy for the day ahead. He'd slept little, his mind swirling with strategies and worst-case scenarios. A text from Hawk buzzed on his phone just as he finished his coffee. I can send 2 men within 48 hours. Keep me posted. Better than nothing, Jack thought. 2 well-trained operators might tip the scales if used correctly. For now, the immediate priority was to check the abandoned railroad tunnel where suspicious activity had been spotted. Travis pulled up in an old Jeep not long after. The man wore a rugged jacket and a ball cap turned backward, a hunting rifle resting in the passenger seat. Ready? He asked curtly. Jack nodded, grabbing his gear and locking the garage. They drove out of town, following a dirt road pockmarked with ruts and rocks. The morning light revealed how stark and empty the land truly was. No trees for cover, just scraggly bushes and jagged rocks. Perfect territory for an ambush if you didn't know what you were doing. After half an hour, they arrived at the collapsed railroad tunnel. Mounds of broken concrete and twisted metal barred the main entrance, but the rest of the structure was partially intact. Travis parked the Jeep behind some large boulders, out of sight. Both men moved carefully, scanning the area for signs of recent activity. A pair of vultures circled overhead, their silhouettes crossing the bright sky. Jack held his breath as he approached a secondary opening near the side of the tunnel, an old maintenance hatch big enough for a person to squeeze through. Sure enough, footprints in the dust told him it had been used recently. He gestured for Travis to stay low while he peered inside. The interior smelled of stale air and damp concrete. Shafts of sunlight cut through gaps in the collapsed ceiling, revealing scattered debris. Toward the back, Jack spotted tire marks. A faint echo of voices made him freeze. Someone was inside. He motioned for Travis to cover him while he crept forward, heart pounding against his rib cage. Step by careful step, he maneuvered around chunks of fallen ceiling. Soon he saw them. 2 men dressed in dark clothing, rummaging through crates stacked against the tunnel wall. One crate was open, revealing what looked like assault rifles and ammunition. Jack felt a chill run down his spine. This was a weapons stash. If the cartel was setting up supply points like this, they were preparing for a significant presence. He silently gestured for Travis to retreat and signal the sheriff. But Travis, perhaps forgetting his place, shifted his weight on a loose stone. The clatter echoed through the tunnel like a gunshot. Instantly, both cartel men spun around. One reached for his weapon, eyes darting in the half-light. Jack, cursing under his breath, raised his sidearm. He fired a warning shot into the ceiling, sending chunks of concrete raining down. "Don't move!" he barked, his voice reverberating. For a split second, it seemed they might comply. But then the second man lunged behind a crate, yanking up a rifle. Bullets ricocheted off the tunnel walls, sparks flying in the dim light. Jack dove behind a concrete slab. Travis ducked, returning fire with his hunting rifle. The tunnel filled with deafening noise and acrid gun smoke. The cartel men had the advantage of heavier firepower, but the confined space worked in Jack's favor, limiting their line of fire. He inched around the slab, firing a well-placed shot that caught one gunman in the shoulder. With a cry, the man collapsed behind the crate, leaving his partner frantically reloading. Sensing a chance, Jack rushed forward, gun aimed. "Down on the ground," he yelled. The second man hesitated, sizing up Jack's authoritative stance, the muzzle pointed unflinchingly at him. Slowly he dropped the rifle, raising his hands. The echo of the last shot faded, leaving only the sound of Travis's ragged breathing. They'd stumbled upon a cartel cache and started a firefight earlier than planned. Jack's pulse hammered with the realization. There was no turning back. The cartel would learn of this encounter soon enough, and their retaliation would be swift. Rusted Pine was about to become ground zero for a confrontation no one could ignore. Travis bound the uninjured cartel member's hands with plastic zip ties, while Jack kept his weapon trained on the wounded one. The man clutched his shoulder, grimacing in pain but still glowering defiantly. A brief search of their pockets revealed IDs from across the border, confirming their affiliation with Los Escorpiones. "We need to call the sheriff," Travis said, his voice shaky from the adrenaline spike. "He'll know what to do with these guys." Jack nodded, but his thoughts raced ahead. "Yeah, let's get them outside first, away from these crates, then we'll secure this place as best we can." The echoing confines of the tunnel made him uneasy, a tactical nightmare if more cartel operatives arrived. He motioned for the wounded gunman to stand, offering an old cloth for him to press against his bleeding shoulder. "You can walk, or we'll drag you," Jack warned. The man spat on the ground but complied, limping along. Outside, the desert sun seemed blinding after the tunnel's darkness. With the prisoners on their knees by a boulder, Travis dialed the sheriff. Jack used the moment to inspect the crates. He lifted the lid on one: assault rifles, high-capacity magazines, and several boxes of ammunition. Another contained what looked like components for improvised explosives. The hair on his neck stood up. The cartel wasn't simply storing a few weapons. They were stockpiling for a serious operation. Travis returned, phone in hand. "Duncan and Alvarez are on their way. He wants us to hold tight." Jack scoffed, scanning the dusty horizon. "If more of these guys show up, we won't have time for a welcome party." He studied the captives. "Let's hope they're not carrying trackers or radio beacons." Before long, the sheriff's cruiser kicked up a plume of dust as it approached, Alvarez's vehicle right behind. Duncan stepped out, one hand on his sidearm. "Holy hell," he muttered, taking in the scene. Two bound men, blood on the rocks, crates of weapons. "Guess we just found out how serious this threat really is." Alvarez carefully approached the prisoners, checking for additional weapons. The wounded man glared, refusing to speak even when pressed. The other sneered, a mocking smile crossing his face. "You have no idea what's coming," he said in a thick accent. "Zamora will burn this town to the ground." Travis stiffened, anger flashing in his eyes, but Jack held up a hand to prevent any outburst. Losing control would do no good. "We'll move them to the station's holding cell," Duncan decided, though his voice quavered slightly. "Problem is, we've only got 2 cells. If Zamora sends more," Jack cut him off, "we'll have bigger issues than cell space. We need to conceal these crates fast, or at least secure them. If the cartel catches wind that we're onto their weapons stash, they'll come full force to retrieve it." Duncan nodded grimly. "Let's load what we can into our vehicles. Maybe we can store it in the old storage yard behind the station. We'll label it as county evidence. That might slow them down. With tense efficiency, they packed the weapons into the trunks of the cruiser and Alvarez's SUV. Travis helped wrestle the prisoners into the back seats, one in each vehicle. Jack took a final survey of the tunnel entrance, suddenly acutely aware of how exposed they were. "We better move," he urged, glancing at the sky. The sun was climbing, and with it, the risk of being spotted. As the small convoy headed back toward Rusted Pine, Jack's thoughts churned. They had just drawn first blood. There was no doubt in his mind that Hector Zamora would retaliate, and soon. They arrived at the police station to find a small crowd forming outside, curiosity ignited by the arrival of multiple vehicles and the sight of men under arrest. Whispers spread. "Is that the cartel? Did we catch them?" Fear mingled with a strange sense of relief. Some townspeople felt safer knowing the sheriff had someone behind bars. Inside, the station's cramped lobby buzzed with tension. Duncan and Alvarez led the prisoners to the holding cells, while Jack and Travis helped stack the confiscated weapons in a locked evidence room. The array of hardware was enough to equip a small militia, automatic rifles, handguns, and explosive components. It was a sobering sight. Clara slipped in from the street, her face pale. She caught Jack's eye as he emerged from the evidence room. "Is it true you found a stash of weapons?" Jack nodded gravely. "Cartel. They were guarding it in an old railroad tunnel. We've got 2 of them in custody now." She exhaled, relieved yet visibly shaken. "What happens next?" "We brace ourselves," Jack answered, voice low. "Zamora's men won't let this go unanswered. We have to be ready for retaliation." Just then, Sheriff Duncan strode down the hallway, face set in grim determination. "We're going to need every bit of help we can get. Jack, do you think your contact can speed up assistance?" Jack remembered Hawk's message. 2 men within 48 hours. It might be too little, too late. Still, he said, "I'll try." He stepped aside, pulling out his phone to place another call. Hawk picked up on the second ring. "Hawk, it's Harper. We just seized a substantial cache of cartel weapons and took 2 prisoners. There's no way Zamora will sit on this. We need backup ASAP." On the other end, Hawk's breath hissed. "That escalates things. I'll push my men to arrive sooner, but 48 hours is still the best they can do. They'll be traveling lightly, though. No heavy vehicles, just their own gear." Jack's grip tightened on the phone. "Understood. Thanks, Hawk." When he hung up, the room felt colder, despite the desert heat. The townspeople were counting on him, on the sheriff, and they had only a short time to prepare. Clara caught his eye again, and he could see her searching for reassurance. He offered a small nod, hoping it was enough to calm her nerves. Duncan gathered Jack, Travis, Alvarez, and a couple of other capable volunteers, Cole among them, in the tiny conference room. The walls were adorned with outdated posters about safe driving and missing pets, relics of a more peaceful era. "We need to plan defenses," Duncan said, spreading a map of Rusted Pine across a battered table. "We'll divide the perimeter into sectors. Alvarez and I can hold the station in case the cartel tries a frontal assault here. Jack, you know how to set up ambushes?" Jack nodded, tapping a point on the map near the canyon. "We could use the rocky terrain to our advantage. Force them into choke points. If we have night vision gear, we can move after dark." Travis crossed his arms. "We got to consider the civilians, too. Where do they go if there's a shootout?" "That's the hardest part," Jack admitted. "We could use the church basement or the old school as shelters. Clara, Cole, and other locals who aren't on the front lines can help coordinate supplies, first aid, and communications." The group exchanged uneasy glances. They were, in effect, turning their beloved hometown into a fortress. But with the stakes so high, there was no other choice. As the gravity of the situation sank in, Duncan pressed his hands flat on the table. "We may not have the resources of a big city PD, but we have heart, and some know-how," he said, looking pointedly at Jack. "We protect our own, no matter the bug." Jack swallowed hard. The eyes of everyone in that room seemed to settle on him, silently asking, "Can we do this?" He cleared his throat, steeling himself. "We'll make a stand," he answered, voice resolute. Zamora picked the wrong town to push around. They spent the rest of the day finalizing plans. Makeshift barricades would go up on key roads. The water tower, with its commanding view of the town, would serve as a lookout point. Jack assigned Cole to oversee communications, setting up walkie-talkies and ensuring at least one line of contact remained open if the cell towers went down. By dusk, Rusted Pine looked like a town on alert. Pickup trucks with plywood shields patrolled the outskirts, townsfolk boarded up windows, and a hush settled over the normally lively diner. Even Butch, Jack's loyal dog, seemed on edge, pacing around the garage instead of napping in his usual spot. Jack stepped outside to find Clara waiting by his truck. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of orange and violet. She wore a weary expression and carried a small paper bag. "I brought you some dinner," she said softly, handing him the warm package. He glanced inside. 2 sandwiches, a thermos of soup. "You didn't have to," he said, but the gratitude in his eyes was genuine. Her gaze flicked to the gun holster on his belt. "I wanted to. You've done so much for all of us." She paused, struggling with her next words. "I'm scared, Jack. If a shootout happens..." He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "We're going to minimize danger for the civilians. The church basement will be stocked with supplies. You should stay there if things go south." She looked like she wanted to protest, but then nodded. "Promise me you'll come back in one piece." Jack forced a smile. "I'll do everything I can." A cold wind blew through the street, rattling a loose sign and sending a shiver down Clara's spine. "I better check on Ms. Henderson before heading to the church. She's practically family to me." He admired her resolve. "Go on then. Stay safe." Once she was gone, he sighed, taking a moment to eat the sandwich and soup. The warm meal grounded him, a small comfort in the swirling chaos. His phone buzzed. Another text from Hawk. "Team departing sooner. ETA 2430 HRs. Hang tight." Relief mingled with anxiety. A day could be an eternity in a situation like this, but at least help was coming. He pulled out a battered piece of paper from his pocket, a list of last-minute tasks. He marked off dinner, a small yet essential item to keep his energy up for what lay ahead. Next on the list, double-check perimeter. Armed with a flashlight and a rifle he'd retrieved from the seized cartel stash, one that was in good condition, Jack made his rounds. He stopped by each barricade, ensuring the volunteers were set with water, ammunition, and radios. Travis was perched in the water tower, binoculars in hand, scanning the desert for any sign of approaching vehicles. The night deepened, and an eerie stillness set in. The wind had died, leaving only the soft hum of streetlights. Each shadow seemed elongated, sinister. At the far edge of town, Jack spotted a flicker of headlights in the distance, but they disappeared quickly, a passing traveler perhaps, or someone scouting from afar. Returning to his garage, he patted Butch on the head and locked the door. The dog whimpered, sensing the tension. "It's okay, boy," Jack whispered, even though they both knew it wasn't quite true. Tonight could be their last relatively peaceful night for a while. He rummaged through the footlocker one final time, extracting a small bag of specialized equipment, zip ties, a signal flare, a makeshift med kit. His old commanding officer's voice echoed in his mind. Preparation is half the battle. At this point, Jack had prepared as much as he could. All that remained was the waiting, and whatever storm would break over Rusted Pine when the cartel finally showed its hand. Midnight found Jack in a restless vigil by the garage window. He'd cut the lights, relying on the moon's glow to illuminate the deserted streets. A sense of foreboding thickened the air. Some nights a person could tell when trouble was about to strike. This was one of those nights. His radio crackled with Travis's voice from the water tower. "All clear up here, Jack. No movement on the west side." Jack quietly acknowledged, signing off. He clicked to a second channel. Alvarez, stationed at the north barricade, reported the same. Nothing. The minutes crawled by. Another hour passed, still no sign of the cartel. Perhaps they were regrouping or waiting for reinforcements. Jack resisted the urge to second-guess their plans, reminding himself that unpredictability was part of any conflict. He dozed off for a few minutes, only to jerk awake at the faint sound of an engine in the distance. Heart pounding, he searched the darkness, but saw nothing. At first light, he decided to get some fresh air. With Butch trotting alongside, Jack stepped onto the porch. A faint pink hue laced the eastern sky. The emptiness of the street struck him. No children riding bikes, no early risers walking dogs. A single tumbleweed rolled past like a ghost of the Old West. A voice startled him. Cole, approaching on foot. "Morning, Jack," he said in a hushed tone. "Heard from Travis. He says we might have a better vantage if we set up a second lookout up by Carson's Bluff." Jack nodded, recalling the rocky rise not far from the railroad tracks. "It's a smart move. If they come from that direction, we'll catch them early." They walked together toward the makeshift command post at the police station. Inside, Sheriff Duncan leaned over a map with Alvarez, eyes bleary from lack of sleep. The arrested cartel members were locked in separate cells, refusing to talk. Duncan looked up as Jack and Cole entered. "Morning," he greeted with forced cheer. "Any movement?" "Nothing," Jack said, "which worries me more than if they'd attacked. They're likely biding their time." Duncan sighed. "We've got folks cooped up in the church basement. Rumors are flying about the firefight at the tunnel. Some want to leave town altogether." Cole lowered his gaze. "Can't blame them. We're basically a war zone in waiting." Jack rubbed his temples. If they can safely get out, that might be best. Less chance of innocent bystanders getting caught in the crossfire. Duncan considered it. "What do we tell them? Just head out on the main road and hope they don't run into cartel scouts?" "It's a risk," Jack admitted. "But if we keep them here, we're risking them being used as leverage if the cartel breaches our defenses." After a tense debate, they agreed on a voluntary evacuation option. A convoy of vehicles would head east along a lesser-used desert route, hoping to avoid detection. Jack felt a pang, knowing Clara might choose to go, but part of him wanted her far from the coming violence. By mid-morning, preparations were underway for those who wanted to leave. A few families loaded up trucks and station wagons with essentials. Children clutched stuffed animals, their eyes wide with fear. Jack guided them to the side road, giving them final instructions on how to stay off major highways. "Check in if you can," he said, handing out radio frequencies. The departing vehicles kicked up dust as they rolled out, the sun climbing higher, casting stark shadows. Jack watched them go, a heaviness in his chest. Rusted Pine felt even emptier now, like a stage cleared for the main event. He steeled himself, checking his gear. If the cartel was waiting for their moment, that moment was drawing near, and he had to be ready, no matter the cost. As midday heat hammered down, a hush lay over Rusted Pine's main street. Only a skeleton crew remained. Duncan, Alvarez, Cole, Travis, Clara, a handful of other volunteers, and of course, Jack. The rest of the town's residents had either evacuated or barricaded themselves inside their homes, windows covered with planks or blankets. Every sense felt heightened, as if the desert itself was poised for an attack. Jack and Cole drove out to Carson's Bluff to set up an additional lookout post. The trail leading to the bluff was little more than a jagged path, the Jeep rattling as it climbed. At the top, they found a natural vantage point overlooking the barren expanse toward the railroad tracks and canyon. They stepped out, binoculars in hand, scanning the horizon. Cole pointed to a cluster of shimmering shapes in the distance. "Heat haze, but that might be vehicles. Hard to tell how many." Jack studied the shapes through his scope. "I see at least 2 or 3. They're moving slow, probably off-road." His pulse quickened. If these were cartel convoys, they were heading straight for the canyon approach, a direct line to Rusted Pine. Cole cursed under his breath. "We gotta warn the sheriff." Jack keyed his radio, speaking calmly. "Duncan, this is Jack. We have possible hostile movement coming from the west, near the canyon. At least 2 vehicles, maybe more." A crackle, then Duncan's voice. "Understood. Get back here or keep eyes on." Jack weighed the options. "I'll stay a bit longer to confirm. Cole can head back if you need more manpower." Cole hesitated, torn between wanting to stay and do something. Finally, he nodded. "I'll grab the Jeep, tell the sheriff what we saw." He clapped Jack on the shoulder, then hopped into the driver's seat, bouncing down the rocky path in a spray of dust. Alone on the bluff, Jack hunkered down behind some rocks, adjusting his binoculars. The vehicles came into clearer view. A large SUV and a pickup truck with tinted windows, plus something trailing behind that he couldn't quite make out. The distance was too great to see faces, but the direction was unmistakable, toward Rusted Pine. Minutes stretched like hours. Jack's radio buzzed occasionally with updates. Travis still saw no activity from the water tower vantage. Alvarez was double-checking barricades, and Clara was coordinating with anyone still in the diner. Each crackle over the radio felt like a lifeline, a reminder he wasn't in this alone. Then a shimmer of movement caught his eye, a second convoy further behind the first. So they're not just sending a scouting party, he muttered grimly. This was a coordinated push. He snapped a few pictures with a small camera, though he knew there was little time for intelligence if the attack was imminent. His mind raced. He needed to determine how far away they were, likely an hour or two given the terrain. Enough time for Rusted Pine to get into position, but not enough to call for additional outside help. Hawk's men wouldn't arrive for another day or more. Over the radio, Duncan's voice came through. "Jack, you still up there?" "Yeah," Jack replied quietly, eyes locked on the approaching vehicles. "We've got multiple convoys. They'll be here sooner rather than later." A pause. "We'll finalize the defenses. You get back safe, here?" "Copy." Jack lowered his binoculars, adrenaline pumping. Gathering his gear, he hurried down the rugged path to where Cole had parked earlier. Only the dust remained. Cursing softly, he realized he'd have to trek half a mile or so on foot to where they'd left an ATV. As he jogged, careful not to twist an ankle on loose rocks, his heart pounded with both exertion and fear. This was it, the culminating threat they had all been bracing for. Hector Zamora's men were coming in force, and Rusted Pine would either hold its ground or be swallowed whole by the desert. Jack gritted his teeth, a steely resolve washing over him. If it was a fight Zamora wanted, then a fight he would get. Back in town, the atmosphere was electric with anxiety. At the sheriff's station, a makeshift command center buzzed with activity. Duncan, Alvarez, and Cole huddled over a map while Travis provided updates from the water tower. Clara handed out bottled water and snacks to the few volunteers who remained, trying her best to keep spirits up. When Jack finally returned, dust-coated and out of breath, everyone turned to him expectantly. He wasted no time relaying what he'd seen. 2, possibly 3 convoys heading straight toward them. Duncan cursed under his breath. "We can't handle that many with just a handful of fighters." He looked over at Alvarez. "We might need to consolidate at one choke point." "That's the Canyon Road," Jack said, nodding. "Narrow pass, rocky terrain, easy to barricade. If we can hold them there, we stand a chance. Otherwise, they'll just roll right into the main street." Cole leaned forward. "We can drag some debris onto the road, create a bottleneck, lay down spike strips, whatever we can find." Travis spoke through the radio from the tower. "I can cover you guys with a rifle from up here. Not super accurate at that distance, but I can at least provide warning shots." Duncan tapped the map decisively. "All right, we'll make a stand at the Canyon Pass. Alvarez, you and 2 volunteers take the station's squad cars. Block off the road behind them once they're in the canyon. Jack, Cole, Travis, and I will engage from the front." Clara looked uneasy. "What can I do?" Jack turned to her. "Stay at the station or the diner. Help coordinate. If there are wounded, you can assist them. We might need a makeshift clinic." She swallowed hard but nodded. "Just be careful out there." Within minutes, the plan was set. Vehicles loaded with scrap metal, tires, and any other obstacles that could be piled onto the narrow road. The old construction site near the edge of town provided a treasure trove of cinder blocks and plywood. Everyone worked with a frenetic energy, sweat pouring down their faces. Jack took a moment to breathe, leaning against the squad car. He'd seen his share of combat, but never on home soil, never with neighbors relying on him. The memory of his SEAL training felt like a distant echo. Useful, yes, but overshadowed by the high stakes of defending people he cared for personally. Sheriff Duncan approached, placing a hand on Jack's shoulder. "I know this isn't exactly standard operating procedure," he said, "but I'm damn glad you're here." Jack offered a wan smile. "I wish the circumstances were different." They drove out to the Canyon Road in a small convoy of their own. Alvarez and his volunteers waited farther back, ready to seal the passage once the cartel vehicles entered. Jack, Cole, and Duncan unloaded the debris, hastily constructing a makeshift barrier about half a mile from the canyon entrance. The sun beat down mercilessly, turning the rocky ground into a blazing skillet. Time seemed to blur, Sweat stung Jack's eyes as he hoisted cinder blocks into place. Cole hammered nails into wooden boards, creating crude caltrops. Duncan checked his sidearm for the third time, anxiety clear in his eyes. Somewhere overhead, Travis's vantage point from the water tower extended out of sight, but they all relied on him to warn them if the convoy changed course. Then, just as they finished reinforcing the barricade, Travis's voice crackled over the radio. "I see them. They're coming around the bend, maybe 10 vehicles total. Armed men in the truck beds. They'll be at your position in minutes." A hush fell. Jack exchanged a grim look with Duncan and Cole. "Positions," the sheriff ordered quietly. They scrambled behind rocks and abandoned vehicles, weapons at the ready. Dust clouds appeared on the horizon, the roar of engines growing louder. Jack's heart slammed in his chest. This was it, the make-or-break moment. Los Escorpiones was about to collide with Rusted Pine, and the fate of the town hinged on their improvised defense. The first SUV barreled into view, tinted windows glinting in the harsh sunlight. Behind it, a battered pickup truck loaded with cartel gunmen followed closely. Dust swirled around them, blending with the thunderous roar of engines. Jack huddled behind a rusted tractor, rifle clenched in sweaty hands, heart pounding like a war drum. Sheriff Duncan's voice came over the radio in a tense whisper. "Hold fire until they're fully into the bottleneck. We want them to commit." Jack steadied his breath, peering through his rifle's scope. The lead SUV slowed upon spotting the makeshift barricade, the driver clearly unsure of how to proceed. More vehicles began to stack up behind it, exactly as they'd hoped. From his vantage point, Jack could see confusion among the cartel men, some jumping out to inspect the obstacle. A single gunshot sliced through the tense silence. Jack recognized Travis's vantage shot from the water tower. It ricocheted off the canyon wall, a deliberate miss meant to unsettle them. The cartel men scrambled for cover. A volley of panicked fire erupted, bullets pinging against rocks and sending up plumes of dust. "Now!" Duncan shouted into the radio. Jack squeezed the trigger, aiming at the truck's front tire. The rubber exploded, causing the vehicle to list to one side. More shots rang out from Cole's position near a broken-down SUV. The canyon echoed with a cacophony of gunfire. Cartel gunmen returned fire, ducking behind their vehicles. A cluster of them moved around the barricade, scanning for targets. Jack inhaled, exhaled, and fired again, picking off a man who was lining up a shot at Duncan. In the chaos, he saw at least 3 cartel fighters slump to the ground. Over the radio, Alvarez's voice cut through the din. "We're moving in to block the rear exit." The sound of sirens, albeit faint, signaled that the squad cars were closing off the canyon from behind. Pinned down, the cartel men realized they were trapped, and desperation set in. They unleashed a barrage of bullets, chewing up the cinder blocks and sending fragments flying. Duncan ducked as a spray of debris peppered his face. Cole gritted his teeth, returning fire in short bursts to conserve ammo. Jack noticed a group of 4 or 5 cartel operatives slipping out of the vehicles on the far left side, trying to climb the rocky slope. "They're flanking," he warned, shifting his aim. He managed to hit one, causing the others to drop low. The sheriff and Cole adjusted their positions to intercept, but the men continued scrambling, seeking higher ground. Suddenly, an explosion rocked the canyon. One of the trucks went up in flames, likely from a stray bullet hitting its gas tank. The shockwave buffeted Jack, and he momentarily lost sight of the flanking group. Smoke billowed, adding another layer of chaos to the battlefield. The radio crackled again, Travis's voice urgent. "More vehicles approaching from the west. 2 pickups loaded with men." Jack's stomach tightened. Reinforcements had arrived quicker than they anticipated. The carefully orchestrated ambush could quickly turn into a siege if they were outnumbered. He signaled Duncan with a hand gesture, then spoke into the radio. "Alvarez, watch your 6. They might try to push past the squad cars." He received no immediate reply. Gunfire intensified, reverberating off the canyon walls until it felt like the ground itself was shaking. Jack's rifle was hot to the touch, spent casings littering the rocky soil. Through the smoke and haze, he locked eyes with a cartel gunman aiming an AK-47. For a split second, time slowed. Jack reacted, firing a single shot that found its mark. His ears rang and dust coated his lungs. Despite the case, he felt a grim resolve fuel him. Rusted Pine would not fall without a fight. Through the swirling smoke, The silhouette of more cartel men advanced. The battle was far from over. Thunderous gunfire rattled the canyon, each shot echoing like a rolling storm. Jack could barely see through the smoke and dust, his eyes stinging. He crouched low, heart hammering, as bullets whizzed overhead. Somewhere to his left, Sheriff Duncan shouted commands to Cole, who was huddled behind a crumbling boulder. The reinforcements that Travis had warned of surged forward, quickly joining the fray. One pickup skidded to a halt near the rear, men spilling out and firing indiscriminately at the barricade. From the vantage point of the water tower, Travis attempted to suppress them, but the distance was too great for precise shots. Then Jack's radio squawked with Alvarez's panicked voice. "They're ramming the squad car! Repeat, they're ramming the—" A deafening crash drowned out the rest, followed by static. Fear clutched Jack's gut. If they broke through from behind, they'd be surrounded on two fronts. Gathering his courage, Jack signaled Duncan. "We have to stop them from flanking both sides." Duncan nodded, reloading his sidearm. "Cole, stay on this barricade. Jack, you're with me." The two scrambled around the left flank where the canyon wall rose steeply. They navigated fallen rocks and scattered shell casings, stepping over the bodies of downed gunmen. The acrid smell of gunpowder and burning rubber filled the air. Rounding a bend, they spotted three cartel fighters climbing a narrow ravine that led back to the main road. If they made it, they could circle behind the barricade. Jack fired first, winging one in the leg. Duncan followed up with a well-placed shot, neutralizing a second. The third dove behind a rock, returning fire. Chips of stone sprayed as Jack ducked, wincing when a fragment sliced his cheek. "Go around," Jack whispered to Duncan, motioning toward a cluster of boulders. The sheriff nodded, edging to the right while Jack laid down, covering fire. The gunman popped up for a better angle, exactly when Duncan flanked him, forcing a surrender. The battered man dropped his weapon, hands raised. Before Jack or Duncan could secure him, however, a sudden spray of bullets from higher up the ravine rained down, striking the cartel fighter and forcing Jack and Duncan to scramble for cover. Another pair of cartel gunmen had taken position, pinning them down. Meanwhile, a new explosion tore through the canyon, likely another vehicle igniting. The noise was immense, rattling Jack's eardrums. Over the cacophony, he heard a faint voice. Travis, perhaps, calling something unintelligible over the radio. Gritting his teeth, Jack fired blindly toward the higher ridge, hoping to force the unseen shooters to duck. Duncan tried the radio. "Cole, Alvarez, anyone copy?" Only static replied. Anxiety gnawed at Jack. If they'd lost communication, it meant the firefight was devolving into pockets of case, each group on its own. A bullet ricocheted off a boulder near Jack's head, narrowly missing him. He clenched his jaw, wishing for even a fraction of his old SEAL team to cover his back. In that instant, he understood the full weight of what they were up against. A cartel well-armed and ruthless, coming in waves, unafraid to lose men if it meant capturing the town. His muscles tensed. No matter how dire this seemed, surrendering was not an option. Rusted Pine was counting on him and the others to stand firm. Jack pointed to Duncan and motioned for a coordinated move. On his signal, they both popped up, unleashing a barrage of covering fire at the cliff. The hidden gunmen scattered. In the lull, Jack sprinted forward, closing the distance. If he could get a better angle or find a path to outflank them, he might end this immediate threat. Dust choked his lungs as he ascended the rocky slope, sweat and blood stinging his eyes. Each step felt heavier than the last. He pushed on, driven by the faces of those he vowed to protect. Even as the next hail of bullets tore into the rocks around him, Jack pressed forward, determined to hold the line and protect his hard-won home, no matter the cost. Gunfire crackled across the canyon like an unrelenting thunderstorm. Jack scrambled up the rocky slope, doing his best to stay behind outcroppings for cover. His lungs burned with each ragged breath, and sweat stung his eyes. Just below him, Sheriff Duncan crouched behind a large boulder, reloading his handgun with trembling hands. The sheer volume of bullets flying around them made conversation impossible. Communication relied on terse gestures and eye contact. A few yards higher, the pair of cartel gunmen who had pinned them down and remained hidden. They fired sporadic bursts, forcing Jack to flatten against the cliff each time. One bullet chipped off a shard of rock near his face, sending dust across his cheeks. He suppressed a cough, adrenaline surging through his veins. He needed a better angle, or he and Duncan would remain easy targets. Jack motioned for the sheriff to hold position. Then, in a swift, practiced move, he hurled a small fragment of stone to the left, causing a rattling distraction. The gunmen reacted, shifting their aim. Jack took the opportunity to dart to the right, finding partial cover behind a scraggly juniper bush that clung stubbornly to the rock face. Hard hammering, he steadied his rifle and peered around the trunk. He caught a glimpse of one cartel shooter, a wiry man wearing a bandana, his weapon raised, scanning for Jack's next move. Gritting his teeth, Jack fired a controlled burst. The man cried out, dropping his rifle as he toppled backward. His partner returned fire in a blind panic. Jack ducked, letting the round zip overhead. Duncan seized the moment to rise from behind his boulder, planting two well-aimed shots. The second gunman slumped against the canyon wall, silent. For a beat, the world seemed to hold its breath. Jack blinked, ears ringing, as dust settled over the lifeless forms. He glanced down at Duncan, who was breathing hard, but nodded in acknowledgement. They'd cleared this pocket of resistance, but the larger battle still raged below, where the barricade was under heavy assault. Thick black smoke rose from burning vehicles, and the echoes of gunfire reverberated in the canyon. Over the radio, Travis's voice crackled. "They're pushing hard on the barricade. Cole's pinned down. He needs backup. I see at least 4 more men moving up from the rear. Alvarez can't hold them off much longer." Jack exchanged a grim look with the sheriff. "Let's move," Duncan said, holstering his pistol. They scrambled back down, a tricky descent on loose rock and gravel. Jack nearly lost his footing at one point, grabbing an exposed tree root to steady himself. Every second they spent up here was a second the barricade defenders fought alone. Reaching the canyon floor, they were greeted by chaos. Cole crouched behind an overturned pickup, firing into a group of cartel operatives advancing from behind a second truck. One of the barricade's vehicles was ablaze, thick smoke obscuring the air. Jack spotted Alvarez's squad car in the distance, its front end smashed in, a testament to the cartel's attempt to ram through. Duncan immediately took aim at the advancing gunmen, forcing them to duck behind cover. Jack raced to Cole's side, scanning for a way to flank the attackers. The canyon's walls funneled the fight into a cramped kill zone, and both sides were feeling the pressure. Crouching next to Cole, Jack laid out a quick plan. He'd circle left behind some large rocks and catch the enemy in a crossfire, while Cole kept them occupied. In the maelstrom of flying bullets and choking smoke, they had to rely on raw determination and the synergy of men fighting to protect their home. Gritting his teeth, Jack broke away, heart pounding like a hammer in his chest. Rusted Pine was on the line, and he vowed with every breath in his body he would not let the cartel take it. Jack reached the sheriff's makeshift command area near the toppled barricade. 2 townsfolk in dusty jeans and sweat-stained shirts were administering first aid to Alvarez, whose leg was soaked in blood. The deputy gritted his teeth, wincing with every breath. Duncan knelt beside him, one hand on his shoulder. "He got hit by shrapnel when they rammed the squad car," the sheriff explained, voice laden with concern. "We stopped the bleeding for now, but he needs more than field bandages." Jack's training kicked in. He dropped to one knee, assessing the wound. It looked like Alvarez had a deep gash from a twisted piece of metal. No arterial spray, fortunately, but infection and blood loss were serious risks. "We've got to get him out of here," Jack muttered, pressing a clean cloth to the wound with firm pressure. The diner or the church basement might be set up for basic medical treatment. I know Clara was collecting supplies. Duncan nodded. "We'll get him on a stretcher. I'll send 2 volunteers to escort him, someone who can still drive." Pausing, he surveyed the battered canyon, where flames still licked at the remains of cartel vehicles. "What's the situation on the rest of them?" Cole arrived panting. "We took out a handful of their fighters, but we still hear sporadic gunfire deeper in the pass. They might be pinned down or possibly regrouping. The radio's mostly static, so we're blind on Travis's status." Jack felt a twinge of dread. Travis had been their eyes from the water tower earlier, but with the clash happening along multiple points, it was possible communications were jammed or the battery had died. "We need to confirm if the cartel's fully committed or if they have another wave coming," he said, scanning the canyon walls. A deep rumble overhead made them all flinch, At first, Jack thought it was another explosion. But looking up, he spotted the faint silhouette of a helicopter approaching from the eastern sky, the sun glinting off its rotor blades. "Is that ours?" Cole asked, shading his eyes with one hand. "Not local law enforcement, that's for sure," Duncan replied tersely, stepping back to shield Alvarez. Tension spiked among the group. If the cartel had air support, the situation could spiral out of control. But as the chopper drew closer, Jack recognized a different possibility: Hawk's men. He had mentioned sending a small team. Perhaps they arrived ahead of schedule, using a private helicopter. Sure enough, the craft circled overhead and dipped lower, searching for a landing spot among the rocky terrain. The door slid open, revealing two figures in tactical gear, scanning the scene below. Jack sighed in relief, adrenaline surging anew. "It's friendly," he called to Duncan. The helicopter found a relatively flat stretch near the canyon entrance, blowing up dust and debris in a blinding cloud as it settled. Duncan and Cole helped Alvarez toward it, while Jack jogged ahead, waving an arm to guide the pilot. Once it touched down, the side door opened, and a tall man with salt and pepper hair jumped out, scanning for threats. Another similarly equipped individual followed. "Jack Harper?" the first man shouted above the rotor wash. "Name's Wells. Hawk sent us." Jack nodded, offering a quick handshake. "We've got wounded, and the cartel's pinned us down in multiple locations. Thanks for coming." Wells motioned to his partner. "We're short on manpower, but we've got advanced first aid gear and some heavy ordnance. Give us the situation." Jack wasted no time summarizing. Multiple cartel convoys, scattered firefights, wounded deputy, unknown status on some defenders. Wells nodded, his gaze steeled. "All right, we'll triage the wounded, then move to support your perimeter. Let's get your man on board." As the rotors thumped overhead, Jack felt a surge of cautious hope. Reinforcements, however small, could be the difference between losing Rusted Pine and driving the cartel out for good. But he also knew the final showdown was still looming, particularly if Hector Zamora was somewhere in the canyon, ready to make a last stand. Dust swirled in furious gusts as the helicopter blades churned overhead. Jack, Wells, and the second operative, who introduced herself as Andrews, helped lift Alvarez onto a stretcher and loaded him into the chopper. The deputy's face was pale, but he managed a clenched teeth nod of thanks. Clara's makeshift medical station would have to wait. Wells insisted on evacuating Alvarez immediately to get proper treatment at a hospital an hour's flight away. Duncan and two other volunteers climbed in to assist, leaving Jack and Cole on the ground. The plan was for the helicopter to drop off the wounded, then return to provide air support. As the chopper rose, a wave of relief washed over Jack. Alvarez would survive, and they'd soon have aerial eyes to help contain the cartel threat. Yet the moment was short-lived. From deeper in the canyon, heavy gunfire erupted again, echoing like thunder. Jack and Cole exchanged grim looks. "We can't let them regroup." Jack gripped Cole's shoulder. "We'll push forward, see if we can secure the pass and root out any remaining fighters." Cole nodded, swallowing hard. His face was etched with exhaustion, but his eyes were resolute. They gathered extra magazines from the fallen cartel men, then set off down the debris-strewn canyon road. As they advanced, they picked their way through the wreckage. Overturned vehicles, still smoking, bullet-riddled steel frames, shattered glass crunching underfoot. The acrid smell of burning fuel made Jack's stomach churn. Bodies lay motionless, some wearing the cartel's bandanas, others in dusty civilian clothes. For a fleeting second, Jack felt the sting of regret. None of this would have happened if Zamora had stayed away. But now it was kill or be killed. Movement near a half-collapsed barricade caught Jack's eye. He raised a hand to signal Cole, then took cover behind a ruined SUV. A lone cartel gunman staggered into view, bleeding from a leg wound, his eyes wild with pain and fear. He looked around, weapon dangling at his side. The moment he spotted Jack, he raised the gun, but his grip was weak. Jack squeezed off a single warning shot that pinged off the ground near the man's foot. "Drop it," Jack yelled, voice echoing. For an instant, it seemed the man might comply, but desperation flared in his expression, and he jerked the trigger. Wild rounds smacked the SUV's hood, forcing Jack to duck. Cole snapped 2 shots, hitting the gunman in the chest. He collapsed against the barricade, leaving a smear of blood before sliding to the ground, motionless. Cole pressed his back to the SUV, breathing hard. "No surrender in them," he muttered, voice tight with adrenaline and anger. Jack could only nod. In cartel warfare, mercy was a rare commodity on either side. "We keep going," he said quietly. "We find the rest." They continued forward until the canyon opened up into a wider basin, dotted with scraggly brush and a scattering of large boulders. To the right, Jack recognized the old railroad line, its rusted tracks barely visible beneath sand drifts. No sign of active shooters here, though the lingering smell of gunpowder and the drifting haze suggested a recent firefight. The radio on Jack's vest crackled, faintly picking up Travis's voice at last. "Jack, you alive? Over." Relief coursed through him. "Travis," he replied, pressing the transmit button. "We're here in the lower basin. We've secured most of the pass, but there might still be pockets of resistance." "What's your status?" "Water tower's intact, but I saw more vehicles near your garage. Could be another squad. Hard to tell from this distance. The smoke's thick. You better get back, man." A chill rippled down Jack's spine. His garage? That was home, the heart of his existence in Rusted Pine, and likely filled with his old gear, his tools. The idea of cartel fighters ransacking it sent a surge of rage through his system. He turned to Cole. "We have to go. They might be hitting the town itself." Cole's eyes widened, but he nodded. "Lead the way." With the canyon quieting behind them, Jack and Cole set off toward Rusted Pine, fear and fury fueling each urgent step. If the cartel had turned its sights on the town, then everything they had done so far, every risk, every life lost, would be meaningless unless they could stop the final wave of violence poised to consume their home. Jack and Cole raced along the dusty road, hearts pounding in sync with their rapid footsteps. They'd left most vehicles behind in the canyon, so they were forced to travel on foot at first. Luckily, as they reached the outskirts of the battle zone, they found an abandoned cartel pickup with tires still intact and the keys in the ignition. Wasting no time, Jack hopped behind the wheel and Cole leaped into the passenger seat. The battered truck lurched forward, rattling over potholes and debris as they sped back toward Rusted Pine. Winding through side roads, they kept an eye out for any stray cartel fighters who might have slipped away. Occasional plumes of smoke dotted the horizon, evidence of the havoc that had befallen the quiet desert town. Jack's mind flashed with worry. Clara, she was supposed to be at the diner or possibly tending to the wounded, and Butch, his loyal dog, was inside the garage, unless he'd somehow escaped the chaos. The thought of cartel thugs storming his shop, terrorizing the people he cared about, fueled his urgency. He pressed the gas pedal harder, ignoring the squeal of protest from the pickup's engine. They arrived at the town's southern edge to find a street eerily deserted. Windows were boarded up, doors locked, and not a soul in sight. A tumbleweed, as if mocking the situation, rolled aimlessly across the pavement. The diner's neon sign flickered, partially shot out. No movement inside. Cole pointed ahead. "Jack, look!" A pair of black SUVs idled near the entrance to the garage, engines still running. Several armed men milled around, scanning the area. One was attempting to break the padlock on the garage door, while 2 others stood guard with rifles at the ready. Jack killed the truck's headlights and slowed to a crawl, coasting behind a row of parked cars for cover. He and Cole locked eyes, exchanging a silent understanding. There was no time for elaborate strategy. They had to act fast before these men breached the shop. Shifting into neutral, Jack let the pickup roll quietly until they were within about 30 yards. Then, in a sudden burst of motion, he slammed on the accelerator, swerving the truck to face the SUVs. The cartel men startled, raising their guns too late. Cole ducked out the passenger window, firing a short burst that struck one guard in the shoulder, dropping him. Another gunman scrambled for cover behind an SUV, bullets sparking off the pickup's hood. Jack jerked the steering wheel, aiming to ram the second SUV. Metal crunched against metal, the impact jostling both men inside the truck. The SUV's alarm blared as it rocked sideways. Simultaneously, the third armed thug managed to spray a volley at the pickup, forcing Jack to duck. Shattered glass flew, peppering his arms. Cole fired again, wounding the shooter in the leg. The man collapsed behind the SUV, clutching his knee in a pained howl. Jumping out, Jack and Cole took cover behind the battered pickup. One remaining cartel fighter crouched near the garage door, evidently in shock from the sudden onslaught. Jack aimed, shouting, "Drop it!" The man hesitated, rifle quivering in his grip. Sensing no compliance, Jack fired a precise shot, disarming him. The rifle skittered across the ground and the man fell to his knees, cradling a bleeding arm. With the immediate threat neutralized, Jack sprinted to the garage door. The padlock was half destroyed, a crowbar lying discarded on the ground. "Butch!" he called, heart thudding. From inside, a frantic bark answered. Relief washed over him. He yanked the damaged padlock away and hauled up the garage door. The dog bounded out, tail tucked, sniffing the air and whining. Cole checked the downed cartel men, kicking their weapons aside. None appeared eager to keep fighting. Sirens sounded in the distance. Sheriff Duncan returning, perhaps, or maybe Wells in the helicopter overhead. Jack crouched and ran a hand through Butch's fur, his voice choking with relief. "It's okay, boy, we're here." But the quiet after the short gunfight felt fragile. Jack still hadn't seen Clara, and the presence of these armed men at his doorstep suggested a more orchestrated push was underway. He glanced at Cole, who looked equally concerned. This was far from finished. If Hector Zamora himself was leading the assault, he'd be close behind. A new roar filled the air, helicopter blades chopping through the sky. Jack looked up to see Wells's chopper circling overhead, its spotlight snapping on to illuminate the street. Over the radio, clipped to Jack's belt, a staticky voice. "Jack, it's Wells. We're overhead and see multiple armed targets moving toward the center of town. Where do you need us?" Jack pressed the transmit button. "Focus on the intersection by the diner," he replied, picturing the layout. "We'll handle the garage area. Keep them from spreading out." "Roger that. We'll try to corral them," Wells responded. Cole hustled up beside Jack, glancing nervously at the battered SUVs and the wounded cartel men moaning on the ground. "Think we should tie them up?" Jack nodded. "Yeah, we can't leave them free to regroup." They used zip ties to secure the injured men's hands. One had fainted from blood loss, while the others glared defiantly despite their wounds. As they worked, the radio crackled again. This time, a voice Jack recognized with a jolt of relief. "Jack? Jack, are you there?" It was Clara, sounding fraught but alive. He snatched the handset, exhaling shakily. "I'm here, you okay?" Her voice trembled. "I'm at the diner. Some of them tried to break in, but a few of us managed to barricade the doors. They're still outside. Shots fired. We need help." Jack's gut twisted. The diner. Exactly where Wells was headed. "Hang tight, Clara. We're on our way. Wells is overhead and the sheriff should be rolling in soon." Replacing the radio, Jack set his jaw. "Cole, let's move." But before they could leave, the distant roar of an engine drew their attention. A sleek black SUV burst onto the scene from a side street, headlights blazing. Jack dropped behind the remains of the first SUV, rifle raised. The new arrival screeched to a halt. The driver's door flew open, and out stepped a tall, imposing figure in dark tactical gear. Hector Zamora himself, if the intelligence photos were accurate. Zamora surveyed the carnage with cold, narrow eyes. He seemed unconcerned about the bullets strewn across the pavement or the injured men groaning at his feet. Flanking him were two more cartel enforcers, each armed with an assault rifle. They fanned out, scanning for threats. Jack's heart thumped. The infamous cartel leader looked every bit the ruthless operator he was rumored to be. Steeling himself, Jack shouted, "Zamora, this ends here. Tell your men to stand down, or they won't leave this town alive." For a moment, silence reigned. Then Zamora let out a sardonic chuckle, stepping forward with a swagger that dripped with arrogance. "You must be the mechanic-turned-hero everyone's talking about," he called, voice echoing in the still night air. "I heard rumors, an ex-Navy SEAL playing cowboy. Impressive you made it this far, but this is my territory now." Jack's rifle sights rested on Zamora's chest, but he noticed the two henchmen inching away, trying to flank them. Cole, crouching nearby, noticed too and positioned his own weapon accordingly. Tension sizzled, an invisible line drawn. "You're outnumbered," Jack said, keeping his tone steady. "Your men are scattered, half of them down in the canyon. You won't walk away from this if you keep pushing." Zamora's eyes flashed with anger. Is that what you think? My reinforcements are inbound. You're done, old man. Before Jack could respond, the wail of sirens cut through the night air. Sheriff Duncan and possibly the rest of the volunteer posse. Headlights appeared from another street, flooding the intersection with bright beams. Zamora stiffened, scanning the new threat, and Jack seized the moment. Last chance, he warned. Zamora sneered, leveling a pistol toward Jack. The brief standstill shattered as shots rang out from both sides. Jack ducked behind the SUV, bracing for the final showdown with the man who had threatened to burn Rusted Pine to the ground. Gunfire sparked against metal and concrete in a deafening staccato. Jack pressed his back against the SUV, muzzle flash illuminating the dark street. Across from him, Cole returned fire in short, controlled bursts. Sheriff Duncan's cruiser screeched to a halt at the intersection, red and blue lights strobing across the storefronts. The low thump of the helicopter's rotor overhead added another layer to the pandemonium. Zamora and his two bodyguards dashed behind a parked sedan, unleashing bursts of automatic fire that hammered the squad car. Duncan dove out the driver's side, rolling to a stop behind the engine block. Bullets spiderwebbed the windshield, each impact a thunderous pop. From the chopper above, Wells rained down suppressive fire, but the swirling dust and tight angle made it risky. He was forced to pull up to avoid hitting friendlies. Jack mentally assessed the situation. Two gunmen plus Zamora himself, pinned down but heavily armed. The intersection was wide open, providing little cover beyond vehicles and a few trash bins. Civilians might still be holed up in nearby buildings. We have to force them out of hiding, or they'll keep us pinned down all night. He tapped the mic on his vest. Wells, can you land a few blocks away? We need flanking support on foot. Over. A brief crackle. Copy that. We'll set down near the old hardware store. Give us 2 minutes. Glancing at Cole, Jack pointed to the sedan's position. We'll give them a target up front while Wells circles around. Keep their focus here. When I signal, pour it on. Cole nodded, face grimy with soot and dust. Got it. Duncan from across the street keyed his radio. We've got more volunteers on the way, Jack. But watch your left side. Heard gunshots near the diner, too. Jack's pulse quickened, remembering Clara's distress call. This had to end fast. He raised his rifle, choosing his moment. Then he stood and fired a burst at the sedan's rear. Sparks flew as bullets pinged off metal. Zamora's henchmen retaliated, peppering the SUV with return fire, forcing Jack to drop back down. While pinned, Jack clenched his jaw. Every second counted. Off in the distance, sirens suggested additional law enforcement might finally be arriving, perhaps from the next county. But that could still take time. The firefight threatened to erupt into a citywide war zone if they didn't corner Zamora soon. In a daring move, Duncan sprinted to a nearby alley, sliding behind a stack of pallets. One of the bodyguards pivoted, unleashing a volley that stitched the pavement. The sheriff returned fire with his pistol, forcing the thug to duck back behind the sedan. Cole seized the chance, leaning out to rake the vehicle's side with a gunfire. Windows exploded, shards raining onto the asphalt. Then, from the corner of Jack's vision, he saw two figures in tactical gear. Wells and Andrews, emerging behind a row of parked cars. They moved with precision, creeping up on Zamora's flank. Jack exhaled relief. If we coordinate this right, we can trap them. On my mark, he murmured into the radio, hoping Wells could hear. He counted down silently. 3, 2, 1. In a perfectly timed maneuver, Wells and Andrews popped up behind the sedan, each launching flashbang grenades. The devices clattered on the pavement, releasing an ear-splitting blast and a blinding flash. Zamora's men yelled in disoriented panic. Jack and Cole leaped from cover, rifles trained on the stunned figures. One bodyguard attempted to fire blindly, but Cole's burst took him down. The other staggered, ears ringing, and Jack struck him hard with the rifle butt, sending him sprawling. Only Zamora remained, doubled over from the flashbang's concussive effect, hands clawing at his face. Jack advanced, heart pounding. He kicked the cartel leader's pistol away and pressed his barrel against Zamora's chest. The entire firefight seemed to pause, the swirling dust settling in an almost eerie silence. It's over, Jack growled. His voice trembled with a mix of fury and relief. Call off your men. Zamora spat, glaring up in defiance even through bleary eyes. You have no idea who you're dealing with, he snarled. But the fight had drained from him. The overhead chopper's spotlight settled on them like the eye of judgment. Sheriff Duncan rushed in, handcuffs at the ready, and just like them, after countless bullets and casualties, the man who had terrorized Rusted Pines stood apprehended in the middle of a bullet-riddled street. But Jack barely registered the moment of triumph. His thoughts were already on Clara and the others at the diner, hoping they were still alive to see this victory. With Zamora in cuffs and his remaining men either captured or incapacitated, a massive weight lifted from Rusted Pine. But the night was far from tranquil. Plumes of smoke and the residual stench of gunpowder lingered in the warm desert air. Jack glanced around the shattered intersection, strewn with broken glass and spent shells. Emergency lights flickered, and distant sirens grew louder, signaling the eventual arrival of reinforcements from nearby counties. After exchanging a terse nod with Sheriff Duncan, who was busy ensuring Zamora wouldn't slip free, Jack turned to Cole. We need to check the diner, he said, voice thick with worry. Without waiting for a response, he moved off at a brisk jog, rifle still in hand. Cole followed, scanning side streets for any remaining cartel operatives. Shadows loomed large under the flicker of damaged streetlights. A few battered cars, some with shattered windows, lined the curb. The occasional groan from wounded men echoed off the buildings. Jack tried to focus on the diner. Time felt like it stretched and pulled. When they reached the corner where the diner stood, Jack's heart thumped. Bullet holes riddled the front windows, and a street lamp had been knocked over, sparks fizzing intermittently. Two bodies, cartel gunmen, lay sprawled on the sidewalk, blood pooling beneath them. Whoever defended the diner had fought back fiercely. Cautiously, Jack approached the door. It was barricaded with overturned tables and chairs from the inside. Clara, he called, pressing his ear to the frame. Clara, it's me, Jack. For a moment, no answer. Then came a muffled voice. Jack? Oh, thank God. The barricade shifted, chairs scraping across the linoleum floor. The door cracked open, revealing Clara's pale face, eyes wide with relief. She unlatched it fully, allowing him and Cole to enter. Inside, a few townspeople huddled behind tables, faces streaked with grime and fear. Clara, trembling with adrenaline, threw her arms around Jack in a brief, fierce hug. I was so scared, she whispered, voice thick with emotion. They tried to storm in, but we fired through the window. Some old shotguns, a hunting rifle. They finally backed off. Jack held her, tension in his chest easing slightly. You did great, he murmured, noting the bullet-riddled furniture and shattered coffee mugs on the floor. He recognized the bravery it took for ordinary citizens to hold off armed cartel fighters. Cole swept the diner, checking on the others. No serious injuries, though a young man nursed a grazed arm. A middle-aged woman was helping him wrap it. The group exhaled relief at the sight of Jack and Cole's arrival. News traveled fast. Someone had heard that Zamora was in custody, that the worst might be over. But the mood was far from celebratory. Rusted Pine had been through a war in miniature. Outside, the drone of approaching emergency vehicles intensified. Jack stepped out to wave them down, a ragtag convoy of state troopers, paramedics, and volunteer firefighters. Sirens illuminated the diner's facade in strobes of red and blue. One trooper, stepping out of his cruiser, gaped at the destruction. What the hell happened here? He asked, eyes sweeping the bullet-ridden street. Jack, exhausted, ran a hand through his sweat-matted hair. Cartel infiltration. We held them off, but we've got wounded all over town. Some are still up in the canyon. The trooper let out a low whistle. We'll get ambulances dispatched immediately, and we'll call for more backup to transport prisoners. You guys hold up okay? Jack exchanged a weary look with Clara, who stood in the diner's doorway, still clutching a makeshift bandage in one hand. We did what we had to, he said simply. In that moment, the full gravity of the past hours weighed on him. The gunfights, the injuries, the courage of everyday folks who refused to be bullied. Sirens echoed through the streets, converging on the battered heart of Rusted Pine. For now, at least, the immediate threat appeared contained. Yet Jack knew the road to recovery, physically and emotionally, would be long. Holding Clara's gaze, he silently thanked whatever fate had brought him here. Old instincts and all. Because this time, standing against ruthless men, those instincts had saved not just his life, but the soul of a town that had grown to be his home. By dawn, Rusted Pine resembled a disaster zone. Broken glass, smoldering vehicle husks, and scattered shell casings cluttered the streets. Firefighters sprayed foam over the charred remains of trucks that had exploded during the conflict. Ambulances carried the wounded, both townspeople and cartel members, to nearby medical facilities. A somber hush blanketed the area as the sun rose, revealing the full extent of the devastation. Jack emerged from the diner, stiff and sore, having caught only an hour of restless sleep. Clara insisted he at least close his eyes while they waited for official reinforcements. Now, with morning light bathing the scene, he surveyed the damage. Battered though it was, the diner still stood, its neon sign flickering weakly. The church, the garage, and most of the residential homes were intact. Rusted Pine had survived, albeit scarred. Sheriff Duncan approached, limping slightly from a twisted ankle. Despite the exhaustion etched in his features, he mustered a faint smile. "Looks like we made it," he said, voice hoarse. "State police have taken custody of Zamora and the remaining cartel fighters. They're confirming identities, building a case." Jack nodded, scanning the faces of neighbors gathering in small knots to compare stories, check on friends, and share quiet relief. "It's over then," he said, although uncertainty tinged his words. Cartels had a long reach. Even if Zamora was behind bars, there could be reprisals. For now, though, the immediate crisis had passed. Duncan studied him. "I spoke to a few folks. Turns out your background wasn't as big a secret as you thought. People respect what you did here, Jack." A faint flush of embarrassment mixed with gratitude. "I didn't do it alone," he replied softly. "This entire town fought back." And that was the truth. From Cole's unwavering grit to Clara's bravery at the diner, from Travis's vantage points to the volunteers at the barricades, Rusted Pine had shown collective courage. They meandered toward the garage, stepping gingerly over shards of glass. The broken padlock still dangled from the roll-up door. Inside, Butch let out a welcoming bark, wagging his tail. The sight brought a small smile to Jack's face. Life's simple joys still endured. He knelt, scratching the dog's ears. "Good boy," he murmured. Cole arrived soon after, rummaging through a box of bottled water. "The state troopers are asking for statements," he said, handing out drinks. "Told them we're still sorting everything out." Clara appeared at the doorway, face smudged with soot, hair hastily tied back. "I've got coffee started in the diner if anyone wants it," she offered. Her eyes flicked to Jack, and a silent moment passed between them. No words were needed to convey the relief that both were standing, breathing, and safe. From outside, the womp-womp of helicopter blades signaled Wells's return. The pilot set down in an improvised landing zone next to the station. He hopped out, scanning the battered buildings. "Looks like you folks had a party," he joked, a grim attempt at levity. Jack shook his hand, gratitude evident in his expression. "Thanks for coming," he said. "Could have been a lot worse without your help." Wells nodded. "Hawk sends his regards. We'll be in touch. Once the dust settles, the feds might want to debrief you on the whole operation." Jack grimaced at the thought of more questions, more bureaucracy, but if it meant securing the cartel's downfall, he'd comply. Another wave of relief washed over him. For the first time since the conflict erupted, he allowed himself to believe that Rusted Pine would indeed find a path back to normalcy. It wouldn't be easy, repairing damage, grieving lost neighbors, healing wounds both visible and invisible. Yet the town had proven its mettle, and so had the unassuming mechanic who once believed he could bury his past. The rest of the morning was a blur of activity. Law enforcement from multiple jurisdictions swarmed the town, documenting crime scenes and gathering evidence. An impromptu triage station took shape near the church, where volunteers and medical personnel treated minor injuries. Residents who had evacuated began trickling back, searching for reassurance that their homes still stood. Jack spent much of the time helping direct traffic and answering questions from state troopers. Every so often, he'd catch sight of Clara moving among the wounded, offering water or a comforting word. The unwavering kindness in her eyes never faltered, even as she dealt with the aftermath of violence she'd only read about in newspapers before. Late in the afternoon, he finally found a moment to retreat to the garage's back room. There, he carefully placed his rifle and sidearm on a workbench, methodically cleaning each one. The mechanical motions felt cathartic, a way to wind down from the adrenaline that had kept him going for days. As he wiped the final flecks of carbon from the rifle barrel, a soft knock sounded at the door. "Come in," he said, not looking up. Clara stepped inside, her footsteps hesitant. "Hey," she greeted quietly, eyes scanning the disassembled weapon parts. "You okay?" Jack exhaled, setting the cleaning cloth aside. "Getting there, just trying to wrap my head around everything that's happened." She nodded, sliding onto a nearby stool. For a moment, neither spoke, the silence filled only by the subtle creaks of the old building and Butch's gentle panting in the corner. Finally, Clara broke the hush. "Thank you for fighting, for protecting us, for everything." Her voice trembled with earnest emotion. "I know you wanted a quiet life here. This was the last thing you needed." Jack shut his eyes briefly, remembering the gunfights, the screams, and the suffocating fear. "I suppose life had other plans," he said wryly. Then he turned to face her, resting a hand gently on hers. "Are you all right?" She managed a small smile. "A bit rattled, but I'm alive. And so is just about everyone else who decided to stay and fight. That's a miracle, I think." Their conversation was interrupted by another knock. This time, Sheriff Duncan poked his head in. "Jack, got a sec? The federal guys are here. They want a statement from you specifically." He cast a glance at Clara, offering a polite nod. "Sorry to interrupt." Jack sighed, a trace of annoyance crossing his features. "All right, let me finish up here." Once the sheriff left, Jack gave Clara an apologetic look. She squeezed his hand. "Go. I'll be here." As he rose to leave, she reached into a paper bag, pulling out a sandwich wrapped in foil. "And take this. You probably haven't eaten all day." His stomach growled, reminding him of how little he'd consumed in the past 24 hours. He accepted the sandwich with a grateful nod, then headed out, mind-shifting gears to deal with the approaching wave of official scrutiny. The feds would want to piece together every detail of the firefight, from the canyon standoff to Zamora's capture. Outside, the day's light had shifted to a warm golden hue. Federal agents in suits roamed the streets, snapping photos and interviewing townspeople. Jack approached a stern-faced agent wearing dark sunglasses. "I'm Harper," he introduced, extending a hand. The agent barely glanced at it, preoccupied with a notepad. "Agent Kilbourne, FBI. Heard you led the resistance here. We'd like to talk." Jack bristled at the term led, but held his tongue. Instead, he mentally prepared to recount the events, his discovery of the cartel stash, the ambush in the canyon, the final confrontation on Rusted Pine streets. Even as he began to speak, he felt the emotional toll. Each retelling forced him to relive the firefight's terror and the potential for even worse outcomes. Yet, if his testimony helped ensure that Hector Zamora and his men faced justice, Jack would endure the questions. So he started at the beginning, voice steady despite the exhaustion tugging at his every bone. The agent scribbled notes, occasionally firing off questions. All the while, Jack's gaze drifted to the battered remnants of his town, reminding him why he'd fought and why he'd do it again if necessary. For over an hour, Jack recounted the events in painstaking detail. How he'd first noticed suspicious vehicles, the firefight in the old railroad tunnel, the confrontation in the canyon pass, and finally the desperate last stand in Rusted Pine's main streets. Agent Kilbourne's expression remained impassive as he listened, occasionally glancing at phone messages or conferring with colleagues. When Jack wrapped up, the agent scribbled a final note. "That matches what we've heard from other witnesses," he said, raising an eyebrow. "Except for one detail. You say you found a cache of weapons in the tunnel. Where are they now?" Jack pressed his lips into a thin line. "We confiscated them and turned them over to the sheriff's department. Should be in their evidence lockup, assuming some might have been moved in the chaos." Kilbourne nodded. "I see. We'll follow up. Hector Zamora's presence in your town is part of a larger puzzle, Mr. Harper. We've been tracking him for months, but he moves fast. Often, we arrive to find nothing but rumors. This time, you and your neighbors forced his hand." Jack shifted his weight, arms crossed. "We had no choice." "Of course," the agent said, snapping his notepad shut. "That'll be all for now. We may need to contact you again if charges go to trial." He offered a curt nod, then turned away, phone already to his ear. Jack stood there a moment, letting the tension seep out of him. The formalities might drag on for weeks or months, but at least Zamora was off the streets. Rustic Pine would hopefully see no further reprisals. He wandered back toward the garage, noticing fresh utility vehicles from the local power company restoring downed lines, while volunteer groups began clearing debris. The sight stirred a muted sense of hope. Though battered, the town was alive, actively rebuilding. At the garage, he found Butch napping on an old rug, tail thumping at his approach. Clara was there too, sipping from a paper cup of coffee, her eyes distant. She turned to him with a gentle smile. "All done?" He nodded, removing his cap and running a hand through his disheveled hair. "For now, we'll see what else the feds want." Leaning against the doorway, he inhaled the lingering smell of grease and motor oil, oddly comforting amid the lingering after scent of gunpowder. Clara set her cup down. "I never imagined our quiet town would become—" She paused, eyes flicking to the bullet holes in the garage's metal siding. "Well, this." Jack's gaze followed hers, lingering on the fresh damage scarring at his once ordinary place of business. "Me neither. When I moved here, I just wanted peace." She touched his arm lightly. "You've still got it," she said, her voice soft. "It's changed, but it's home, and we're still standing." A soft bark announced Butch's wakefulness. The dog rose, nudging his muzzle against Jack's leg. Absently, Jack patted the dog's head, the corners of his mouth quirking up. He remembered something his old SEAL mentor once said: "We can't control where the storm hits, but we can choose how we stand against it." Rusted Pine had endured a hellish storm, but it hadn't broken. He glanced at the horizon where the sun dipped low. "Feels like I've aged a decade in the past few days." Clara slid a comforting arm around his waist. "You're not alone," she answered, leaning against him. They stood in shared silence, letting the desert breeze ruffle their hair. For the first time in days, the wind carried no sense of imminent danger, just the promise of another dawn. And for Jack Harper, ex-Navy SEAL turned humble mechanic, that was enough. Over the next several days, Rusted Pine transitioned from a battlefield to a community in recovery. Broken windows were boarded up or replaced. Volunteers repainted scorched walls. Families who had evacuated cautiously returned, relieved to find their homes mostly intact. The church basement buzzed with activity, serving hot meals, dispensing donated clothing, and providing a space for emotional support. Hector Zamora and his highest-ranking lieutenants were transferred to a federal holding facility, facing a litany of charges ranging from weapons trafficking to attempted murder. Rumors circulated about potential retaliation from the larger cartel, but so far, no one else had arrived to challenge the town's newfound unity. On a crisp morning, Jack found himself outside the diner, painting over the bullet-riddled facade. He'd insisted on helping Clara restore the place, which served as both a local hangout and a symbol of Rusted Pine's resilience. The smell of fresh paint mingled with the comforting aroma of coffee and bacon drifting from the kitchen. Clara stepped out, a damp rag in hand, wiping her brow. "You missed a spot," she teased, pointing to a small patch near the window frame. Jack followed her gaze with a grin. "Thought I'd leave a bullet hole as a souvenir," he joked dryly. She rolled her eyes, dipping the rag in a bucket of water. "Please no, I'd rather forget some parts of that night." Inside, the diner was bustling again, truckers passing through, ranchers discussing the next harvest. Even a few out-of-towners who'd heard about the little desert town that fought back. The sense of normalcy felt hard-earned. Sheriff Duncan pulled up in his cruiser, stepping out with a noticeable limp. Though walking slowly, he sported a determined smile. "Morning, folks," he greeted, surveying the newly painted facade. "Looking good out here." Jack offered a nod. "How's the leg holding up?" "Doc says I need to stay off it, but that's not going to happen," Duncan replied with a wry chuckle. Then his voice softened. "Listen, Jack, I've been meaning to ask, any chance you'd consider a part-time deputy position? Could use someone with your training, especially now that our town is, shall we say, a bit more famous." Caught off guard, Jack rubbed the back of his neck. "I appreciate the offer, Sheriff, but I'm not sure if I'm ready to trade my wrench for a badge. The idea of returning to a life of active duty, even in a small-town capacity, felt both familiar and intimidating." Duncan nodded, unperturbed. No pressure, just think on it. You did a lot of good for us, and it'd be nice to have you on hand if any trouble brews again. With that, he tipped his hat, heading inside for a cup of coffee. Clara watched him go, then turned to Jack. What do you think? You'd make a decent deputy, you know. He shrugged, glancing at the scarred street. I've had enough of guns and violence to last a lifetime. But if push comes to shove, I'll stand by this town. Badge or no badge. She regarded him thoughtfully. I know you will. Gently, she took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. And if we're lucky, maybe we'll get some peace around here. They finished painting in companionable silence, the sun climbing higher in a cloudless sky. By midday, the diner's exterior gleamed with a new coat of pale blue, erasing the last visible traces of bullet holes. For Jack, it felt symbolic, an affirmation that a fresh start was possible, even after staring down the worst of humanity. Late that afternoon, he returned to his garage, the place where the whole ordeal had truly begun. The old sign out front still read Nevada Auto and Truck Repairs in faded letters. Inside, Butch wagged his tail, trotting over to greet him. The dog's tail thumped against a wooden crate containing Jack's sealed footlocker, its contents carefully stowed away once more. Glancing around, Jack exhaled a long breath. The tools, the grease smell, the quiet hum of an engine cooling, it all represented life moving forward. Maybe that's the real lesson, he mused. Even when violence invades a peaceful life, one can still rebuild, carrying forward the lessons of resilience and unity. Rusted Pine had done exactly that, and so would he. After the dust settles in Rusted Pine, life slowly returns to normal. The battered diner reopens its doors, and families who once fled gradually come back to rebuild, thankful for a second chance. Our quiet mechanic, revealed to be a former Navy SEAL, earns newfound respect, not through boasting of his skills, but by showing compassion and resilience. Even with the bullet holes patched and the barricades torn down, everyone knows a part of them has changed. Yet hope remains the strongest force of all. From my perspective, this isn't just a story of violence. It's a testament to the power of community standing tall against unimaginable odds. It reminds us that courage and unity can turn even the worst days into a springboard for better tomorrows. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think this kind of bravery exists in every small town? Let's discuss. Share your opinions, comment below, and remember to subscribe if you haven't already. Your voice matters here.